Let's slow things down. You don't have to listen too closely, just let your mind wander while we talk about something incredibly unimportant. If you're enjoying these sleep stories, feel free to give us a like or subscribe, but no pressure at all. Now, let's start our journey. In the labyrinthine streets of ancient Egypt, where the aroma of spices mingled with the Nile's not-so-fresh scent, there was an industry that thrived in the shadows, brothels. But forget the romanticized images of Cleopatra lounging on silk cushions. The reality was more about strategic location, economic transactions, and a clientele as varied as a Netflix recommendation list. These establishments weren't hidden away like some secret society. They were plopped right in the thick of it, near docks where sailors disembarked with more than just cargo on their mind, and next to marketplaces buzzing with traders who needed to unwind after a day of haggling over grain prices. Let's talk about the clientele first. Picture a cacophony of languages and accents as local labourers, foreign merchants, and maybe even a few scribes with extra coin to spend poured in. The docks were hotspots, not just for receiving shipments, but for receiving other types of services as well. Traders who travelled thousands of miles along the Silk Road or navigated the treacherous Mediterranean waters were frequent guests. They brought with them exotic goods and, more importantly, diverse currencies, which the savvy brothel owners were more than happy to exchange for a night of pleasure. Now, the economics of these establishments were anything but simple. We're talking about a pricing structure that could make Wall Street look like a lemonade stand. Depending on the services offered, a night with a courtesan could cost anywhere from a craftsman's daily wage, let's say a couple of deben of copper for the less experienced or less famous workers, to an amount equivalent to a small fortune. We're talking about tens of deben, maybe even hundreds if you are after something particularly luxurious or exotic. It's the difference between buying a simple tunic and a chariot. Both will get you covered, but one's going to leave a much bigger dent in your wallet. The savvy proprietors of these brothels knew their audience. They played to the desires of their clientele like a skilled musician tuning their instrument. Want a simple experience? That'll cost you, but not as much as the full orchestral symphony involving music, incense, and maybe even a little storytelling. The truth is, the services varied as much as the Egyptian climate, and the prices reflected this diversity. And just like today, there was always a market for something a little out of the ordinary. But don't get the wrong idea. This wasn't just a free-for-all. The brothel owners were keen business people who understood the power of location, location, location. They strategically placed their establishments within walking distance of the biggest moneymakers in town. Near the bustling Karnak temple complex, for instance, you could find a thriving red-light district. After all, what better way to collect tithes and offerings than to offer a bit of earthly pleasure after a day of spiritual devotion? For the workers themselves, the brothel was both a livelihood and a trap. Many were slaves or indentured servants bound by debts they could never hope to repay. Others were there by choice, seeking a life that, if not entirely glamorous, at least offered a degree of autonomy unimaginable in other occupations. Consider this. A skilled courtesan could potentially earn more in one night than a farmer might in months of backbreaking labour. It was a harsh reality, wrapped in the allure of wealth and independence. And then there's the myth-busting. We often hear tales of Egyptian sexuality as if it were some kind of free love paradise. In reality, the brothels were tightly controlled both by the state and by social norms. This wasn't some lawless den of hedonism. Taxes were paid, records were kept, and the ancient equivalent of health inspections could happen. The authorities knew that these places were not just social centres but economic engines, and they were loath to let them operate unchecked. So, as we delve deeper into the next parts of this story, keep in mind the bustling backdrop against which these brothels operated. They were not just places of pleasure, but reflections of the complex, hierarchical society of ancient Egypt. They were microcosms of the diverse, economically stratified world outside their doors. And while the tales of seduction and intrigue that surrounded them might be captivating, the truth, as always, is both more mundane and more fascinating than the fiction. So, while Cleopatra might have her legend and the Nile its mystique, the real lives of women in ancient Egyptian brothels were less about opulent fantasies and more about the gritty grind of daily survival. Let's dive into the true stories of these women, who weren't all sipping wine in golden goblets, but often found themselves navigating a maze of societal constraints and economic necessity. First off, forget the notion that these women were akin to modern-day celebrities, living lives of unending glamour. Most women in these establishments were not the Elizabeth Taylor of their day, but more like unsung extras in a massive historical drama. Sure, there were a few who managed to climb the social ladder, but the majority were far from the gilded edges of society. In fact, many were from the lower echelons, often slaves or indentured servants, stuck in a cycle that was harder to break than a pharaoh's curse. A typical day for these women was anything but a leisurely affair. They woke up early, not to the sound of a lyre, but to the hustle and bustle of a city that never quite slept. There were tasks to be done before the clientele even thought about wandering in. Cleaning, preparing, and sometimes even mending. A far cry from the relaxing spa day, you might imagine. And let's talk about their attire. No silk robes dripping with jewels here. Instead, think practical linen that's easy to wash and functional, because when your life is an endless series of transactions, practicality trumps style every time. Now, if you're thinking, okay, maybe they found some solace in their work or camaraderie among their peers, well, that's a mixed bag. While some women might have formed bonds because, hey, shared hardship can forge strong connections, others were more like competitors in a never-ending race for survival. It was less sisterhood of the travelling tunic and more every woman for herself. Economically speaking, these women were a critical part of the ancient Egyptian machine, yet they were often as ignored as a hieroglyph in the corner of a pharaoh's tomb. They contributed to the economy, sure, but let's not kid ourselves. They were not reaping the lion's share of their earnings. The proprietors of these brothels were the ones cashing in, often leaving the workers with just enough to get by. We're talking about wages that could range from a few deben of copper for a night's work to maybe a handful of silver if they were lucky or particularly skilled at negotiating. And while there were rare cases of women who saved up and bought their freedom, such stories were more the exception than the rule. Despite these challenges, some women did manage to use their positions as stepping stones to something greater. Take, for instance, the case of Rhodope, a woman of Greek origin who started as a slave but eventually managed to buy her freedom and establish herself as a wealthy courtesan. Her story is one of the few that suggests a glimmer of hope in an otherwise bleak landscape, a testament to the fact that even in the darkest corners, ambition and wit could light the way to a better future. But let's not get carried away with tales of upward mobility. For every Rhodope, there were countless others who remained trapped in a system that valued them more as commodities than as individuals. Society viewed them as little more than tools of pleasure, their worth measured in daybi, and their lives dictated by the whims of those who held power over them. In a world where divine kings ruled and the afterlife was the ultimate goal, these women's lives were often seen as inconsequential cogs in a much larger, much more complex societal machine. And speaking of societal machines, let's not forget that ancient Egypt was a land of strict hierarchies and social stratification. The women working in brothels were often at the bottom of the social pyramid, with their status just a notch above the enslaved labourers who built the monuments we marvel at today. They were the unseen backbone of the economy, contributing to a thriving trade while remaining largely invisible in the grand historical narrative. As we peel back the layers of this ancient world, it becomes clear that the stories of these women are as complex and multifaceted as the society they lived in. They were survivors, navigating a world that offered them little in terms of rights or respect, yet they found ways to endure, adapt, and sometimes even thrive. Their tales are not just footnotes in history, but crucial chapters that reveal the true dynamics of ancient Egyptian life. So, as we prepare to delve further into this topic, remember that the brothels of ancient Egypt were not just places of pleasure and intrigue, but microcosms of a society grappling with issues of power, economy, and social mobility. The women who worked there were not just purveyors of sensual indulgence, but participants in a broader societal narrative that continues to captivate our imaginations. And while the myths of romance and opulence might still hold sway in our minds, the reality is far more nuanced and infinitely more compelling. As we move forward, let's keep exploring this ancient world with an eye for the details that truly matter, the stories that have been overshadowed by legend yet hold the key to understanding the real forces at play in a civilization that continues to intrigue us millennia later. Stay tuned because there's plenty more to uncover as we piece together the intricate tapestry of life in ancient Egyptian brothels. In our journey through the back alleys and incense-filled rooms of ancient Egyptian brothels, it's time we address the elephant, or perhaps the sacred ibis in the room, the intertwining of sex work with religious practices. Now, before you start imagining orgiastic rituals or cults of debauchery, let's set the record straight. While it's true that sex and religion had a more complicated relationship in ancient Egypt than your average soap opera love triangle, it's not quite the free-for-all some might have you believe. First off, let's talk about the perception of brothels by different social classes. The elite, with their noses perpetually pointed towards the heavens, or at least towards the tips of their meticulously painted statues, often saw these establishments as necessary evils. They were places to keep the common rabble entertained, distracted, and less likely to revolt. Think of them as the ancient equivalent of Netflix, but with a lot more direct participation. For the lower classes, brothels were a part of everyday life, much like the ever-present sound of street vendors hawking their wares. They served as social hubs where gossip spread faster than a Nile flood. Now, here's where things get particularly spicy, the connection between brothels and temples. It's like mixing oil and water, right? Well, not entirely. In the ancient Egyptian world, the line between sacred and profane was blurrier than a sandstorm on the horizon. Temples weren't just places for solemn worship and the occasional animal sacrifice, they were bustling centres of commerce and social interaction. And yes, sex work found its niche here too. Certain festivals, like those dedicated to Hathor, the goddess of love, beauty and music, embraced a more exuberant expression of devotion. During these celebrations, the rigid societal norms loosened like a pharaoh's belt after a feast. Participants engaged in rituals that involved music, dance, and, yes, sexual activities. These weren't wild bacchanals, but rather structured events with religious significance. The idea was to honor the goddess by indulging in the pleasures she represented. It's the ancient version of what happens in Dendera, stays in Dendera, but let's not get carried away with romantic notions. While these festivals offered a temporary escape from the daily grind, they were not free-for-alls. Participants, including those from the brothels, had roles to play, often as ritual performers. This wasn't an open invitation to chaos. It was more like a carefully choreographed play with a sacred script. And what about the workers themselves? How did they fit into this sacred, profane tapestry? Well, their involvement in religious festivals was both a blessing and a curse. On one hand, it offered them an opportunity to step out of the shadows and into the limelight, albeit briefly. On the other hand, it reinforced their role as tools of pleasure and ritual rather than individuals with their own stories. They were part of the spectacle, not the spectators. From a practical standpoint, the intertwining of sex work and religion also had economic implications. Temples were not just spiritual centers, but economic powerhouses. They controlled vast tracts of land and were involved in trade. By incorporating sex work into their festivals, they tapped into a lucrative source of income. It's as if the temple priests moonlighted as early economists, understanding the value of supply and demand long before Adam Smith penned a single word. The state, ever the pragmatic overseer, kept a watchful eye on these activities. Taxes were levied on brothels, and records were meticulously kept. The authorities understood that maintaining a balance between indulgence and order was crucial to the stability of the kingdom. Let things get too wild, and you'd have anarchy. Stifle the fun too much, and you'd have unrest. It was a delicate dance, and the powers that be knew how to lead. So, as we peel back the layers of this ancient society, we find a civilization that was far more complex than the romanticized tales of golden sands and mysterious queens. The brothels were not just places of earthly pleasures, but integral parts of a society that blurred the lines between the sacred and the profane. They were microcosms of a world where people sought meaning, connection, and yes, a little bit of fun, in whatever form they could find it. While the myths of opulence and allure continue to captivate our imaginations, the reality of ancient Egyptian brothels was far more grounded. They were places where the gritty reality of survival met the occasional opportunity for transcendence, where the mundane and the mystical coexisted in a delicate balance. And as we continue our exploration, we'll uncover even more about this fascinating world, where legend and reality collide in ways that are both surprising and enlightening. Stay tuned, because there's still more to unravel in this tale of ancient Egyptian life a story that's richer and more intricate than the most elaborately painted sarcophagus. As we delve deeper, we'll keep peeling back the layers, revealing truths that are as timeless as the desert sands and as enduring as the tales carved into the walls of forgotten temples. As we continue to unravel the tales of ancient Egyptian brothels, let's take a closer look at the political and legal framework that surrounded these tantalizing establishments. Think of it as peeling back the layers of an onion, except the onion is wrapped in papyrus and smells slightly of incense and intrigue. First up, the laws. You might assume that the legal system back then was as straightforward as a hieroglyphic representation of a cat, but you'd be wrong. The governance of brothels was as complex as the design of a pharaoh's tomb, with layers of rules that dictated who could do what, where, and with whom. Brothels were not fringe enterprises operating in the shadows. They were sanctioned by authorities, albeit with a good bit of hand-wringing and discreet profit-sharing. You see, local officials and temple authorities often found themselves in the role of unlikely business partners. They would oversee brothel operations, ensuring that everything ran smoothly, or at least as smoothly as anything could in a world without coffee. In return, they pocketed a share of the proceeds, a practice that was as open as the Nile during flood season. It was a mutually beneficial arrangement. The officials got a financial boost, and the brothels got a veneer of legality. It's the kind of deal that would have made even the most shrewd of modern-day politicians nod in approval. Now, let's talk about the double standards in the laws. It's no surprise that there was a stark contrast between how patrons and workers were perceived. The patrons, often men of various social standings, faced little to no stigma. They were like tourists visiting a historical site, expected to come, enjoy, and leave without a second thought. The workers, however, faced a different reality. They were seen as both necessary and contemptible, a paradox that would make even the Sphinx raise an eyebrow. While the patrons could waltz in and out with their reputations largely intact, the women working in brothels carried a social stigma as heavy as a stone sarcophagus. They were viewed through a lens of moral suspicion, their lives subjected to scrutiny and judgment. It was as if society had decided that the very act of providing a service made them less worthy than those who consumed it. This double standard was the ancient equivalent of the walk of shame, except it was less about a personal choice and more about systemic inequality. In terms of legal documentation, the ancient Egyptians were nothing if not meticulous. Papyrus scrolls documented transactions, taxes, and even disputes. Imagine a bureaucratic system so thorough it would make a modern-day accountant weep tears of admiration. These records were essential for maintaining order and ensuring that everyone, except the workers, got their fair share. The state knew that a well-regulated brothel was less likely to cause social unrest, and they were willing to invest in a bit of parchment to make sure things stayed that way. Temple authorities, often the de facto rulers of local areas, had their hands in the brothel pie as well. Temples weren't just religious centers, they were economic juggernauts. They controlled vast resources and wielded immense influence. By overseeing brothel operations, they ensured a steady stream of income, which they could then funnel into temple activities. It was a cycle that kept the wheels of commerce and religion turning smoothly, or at least as smoothly as a chariot ride across the desert. This arrangement also meant that brothels were often strategically located near temples. The proximity served a dual purpose. It allowed for easy oversight by temple authorities and provided a convenient pit stop for temple goers looking to indulge in some earthly pleasures. It was a win-win situation, except perhaps for the workers, who found themselves at the mercy of both economic and religious forces. Now, all this legal and political maneuvering wasn't just about keeping the peace. It was also about control. By regulating brothels, the authorities maintained a grip on a significant part of the economy. They understood that sexual commerce was not just about individual transactions, but about broader societal dynamics. It was a way to manage social tensions, keep the populace content, and ensure that the economic engine kept chugging along. But let's not sugarcoat it. Despite their official status, brothels were not glamorous places. They were more akin to gritty enterprises, where the harsh realities of survival played out against a backdrop of incense and whispers. The women working there navigated a world where their value was dictated by their economic utility rather than their human worth. It was a system that valued profit over people, a notion that's depressingly familiar even today. In essence, brothels in ancient Egypt were microcosms of the political and economic systems of their time. They were places where power, money, and social norms intersected in ways that were as complex as a pharaoh's family tree. The authorities, ever pragmatic, understood that controlling these establishments meant controlling a key aspect of social order. It was a delicate balance, one that required constant vigilance and a fair amount of compromise. And so, as we continue to peel back the layers of this ancient world, let's remember that behind the myths and legends of Egyptian opulence lies a reality that was both gritty and fascinating. Brothels were not just places of pleasure, but reflections of a society struggling to balance indulgence with order, profit with morality. They were places where the political and personal collided in ways that continue to captivate our imaginations millennia later. Stay with us as we delve deeper into this intricate tapestry of ancient Egyptian life, where every thread reveals a new story, and every unraveling brings us closer to understanding a civilization that was both timeless and intriguingly human. The journey is far from over, and there's still much more to uncover as we explore the complex world of ancient Egyptian brothels. As we unravel the layers of ancient Egyptian society, it's time to reflect on the legacy these brothels left behind and what it all means for us today. Let's not kid ourselves. Brothels were as much a part of the Egyptian landscape as the pyramids, even if they didn't get the same tourist foot traffic. These establishments were not just dens of iniquity, but reflections of the economic and social dynamics that shaped one of the world's greatest civilizations. They reveal a society that, much like ours, was trying to balance the scales of morality, economy, and human nature. The ancient Egyptians, ever the pragmatists, understood that sex work was a cog in the societal machine. The brothels were economic engines as much as they were places of pleasure. The fact that these establishments were taxed and regulated indicates their importance to the state. We're talking about a system where the economy and morality walked a tightrope, with each side tugging for dominance. This tug of war is as ancient as the civilization itself and as relevant today as it was back then. So, what can we learn from this? For starters, the role of sex work in society is neither a modern invention nor a simple moral quandary. It's a complex issue that intertwines with economics, gender roles, and societal norms. The brothels of ancient Egypt offer a window into how societies have historically dealt with the question of sex work, not just as a moral issue, but as an economic reality. In ancient times, these establishments were tightly woven into the fabric of daily life, much like they are today, though often without the same level of overt acknowledgement or regulation. The narratives surrounding these ancient brothels have evolved over time, fueled by both fascination and judgment. On the one hand, they captivate our imaginations with tales of exotic allure and forbidden pleasures. On the other hand, they confront us with the harsh realities of exploitation, economic disparity, and social stigma. It's a duality that persists, where the romanticized vision often clashes with the gritty truth. In contemporary discussions about sex work, gender roles, and economic inequality, looking back at ancient Egypt provides valuable insights. The brothels were microcosms of larger societal dynamics, reflecting issues that still resonate today. Gender roles in these establishments were starkly defined, with men as consumers and women as providers, a dynamic that echoes in modern discussions about sex work and gender inequality. This historical lens sheds light on how far, or perhaps how little, we've come in addressing these issues. Economically speaking, the brothels were part of a broader system of inequality. The wealth generated by these establishments rarely trickled down to the women who worked there. Instead, it lined the pockets of those in power, from brothel owners to temple authorities. This mirrors today's economic inequalities, where the most vulnerable often see the least benefit from the systems they sustain. It's a sobering reminder that while times may change, certain dynamics remain stubbornly persistent. The Egyptian brothels also highlight the blurred lines between the sacred and the profane, a theme that continues to resonate. The intertwining of sex work with religious practices shows us that morality is not a one-size-fits-all concept. It's shaped by cultural, economic, and social factors that are as fluid as the Nile itself. This complexity challenges us to rethink our modern assumptions about morality, legality, and the role of sex work in society. As we look at these ancient establishments through a modern lens, we're reminded of the power dynamics at play. The brothel served as a means of control, both socially and economically. By regulating these spaces, the state maintained a semblance of order, keeping the populace appeased while ensuring the economic machine kept turning. It's a strategy that's as old as civilization itself, and as relevant today as it was in ancient times. In wrapping up our journey through the intriguing, incense-scented alleys of ancient Egyptian brothels, let's acknowledge the duality of their legacy. They were places of both allure and exploitation, functioning as societal pressure valves while simultaneously perpetuating inequality. The stories of these establishments remind us that history is not just a series of dates and events, but a tapestry woven from the lives of individuals navigating complex social landscapes. So, what's the final takeaway from our foray into the world of ancient Egyptian brothels? It's that history, with all its complexities, offers us a mirror, a sometimes uncomfortable reflection of our own societal dynamics. The more things change, the more they stay the same, and the lessons from the past continue to echo through the corridors of time. As we grapple with issues of sex work, gender roles, and economic inequality today, perhaps it's worth remembering the ancient Egyptians who, in their own way, were trying to make sense of the very same human conundrums. In the dusty, olive-strewn hills of Arpinum, a town that was more about sheep than senators, a young Marcus Tullius Cicero was born into a family that knew the value of a good education and a well-timed elbow nudge. Now, Arpinum wasn't exactly the bustling heart of the Roman Empire. It was more like the appendix, far removed from the pulse of power in Rome. Yet, out of this provincial obscurity would emerge a man whose words could topple the mighty and uplift the lowly. Cicero's journey from Arpinum to the Roman Forum is the stuff of legend, but like most legends, it's often sugar-coated. Let's peel back the layers of honey and look at the gritty bits, shall we? The Cicero family, while not destitute, wasn't rolling in denarii either. They belonged to the equestrian class, a notch below the senatorial elite, which meant Cicero had to hustle a bit harder to climb that social ladder. He was the original small-town kid with big city dreams, and what he lacked in pedigree he made up for with a tongue as sharp as a Roman gladius. From a young age, Cicero was shipped off to Rome for schooling, because in Arpinum the closest thing to higher education was probably a lesson in sheep-shearing. In Rome, education was less about enlightenment and more about survival of the fittest. If you wanted to make it in the cutthroat world of Roman politics, you needed to know your rhetorical devices like a gladiator knew his weapons. Cicero studied under the best teachers of rhetoric because in Rome words were power and the pen was indeed mightier than the sword, assuming you had a decent scribe to jot things down. But let's not romanticize this too much. The reality of Roman schooling was a bit like a toga party gone wrong. It was expensive, elitist, and frankly, brutal. The toga itself was a symbol of Roman citizenship and a financial burden. A good toga could cost around 15 sestertii, which might not sound like much until you consider that a loaf of bread was about half a sestertius. So, dressing like a Roman wasn't cheap, and neither was the education. Cicero's family invested heavily in his schooling, a gamble that paid off when he began to make waves in Roman politics. And boy did he make waves. Cicero's rise was meteoric, fueled by his unparalleled oratory skills. He wasn't just a speaker, he was a verbal gladiator. His speeches could flay an opponent's reputation faster than you could say Caesar. But what made Cicero truly remarkable was his ability to navigate the murky waters of Roman politics with a mix of cunning and charisma. He wasn't born into the patrician class, so he had to rely on his wits and words to carve out his place in the political arena. The young Cicero first gained fame during the trial of Sextus Roscius, in which he defended Roscius against charges of patricide. It was a bold move, considering the political sensitivities involved, but Cicero's eloquence and logical acumen dazzled the courtroom. His defense was not just a legal argument, it was a public performance, a demonstration of his rhetorical prowess that left the audience and his opponents stunned. But before you get too swept up in the glamour of Cicero's courtroom drama, remember that Roman justice was often less about the truth and more about who could yell the loudest. And yell he did. Cicero's speeches were peppered with humor, sarcasm, and a healthy dose of moral outrage. He had a knack for turning a phrase that would make even the sternest Roman senator crack a smile, or at least twitch a mustache. Now, while Cicero was busy dazzling Rome with his verbal acrobatics, he was also laying the groundwork for his political career. This was a time when Rome was a republic in name, but a hotbed of power struggles in practice. Alliances were as fickle as a Roman summer, and Cicero, ever the astute politician, knew how to play the game. He was a master of the political balancing act, maintaining relationships with both the populares and the optimates, the two dominant political factions of the time. Yet, despite his success, Cicero never quite shook off the new man label. In Roman society, being a novus homo was a double-edged sword. It meant you were the first in your family to enter the Senate, a commendable achievement, but also a reminder that you were new to the club of old money and ancient names. Cicero wore it as a badge of honor and a target on his back, using it to fuel his ambitions and silence his critics. As Cicero's star rose, so did his aspirations. He aimed for the consulship, the highest office in the Roman Republic, a position that had eluded many a man of greater lineage. In 63 BCE, Cicero achieved this goal, becoming consul, a remarkable feat for a man of his origins. His tenure was marked by the famous Catilinarian conspiracy, where he thwarted a plot to overthrow the government. His handling of the crisis, through a series of fiery speeches, further cemented his reputation as one of Rome's greatest orators. But success in Rome was as precarious as a chariot race in the Circus Maximus. While Cicero was celebrated for his role in quashing the conspiracy, his actions also earned him powerful enemies. He was hailed as a hero by some and criticized as a tyrant by others, a duality that would follow him throughout his career. The early life of Cicero is a testament to the power of words and the audacity of ambition. From the quiet fields of Arpinum to the roaring streets of Rome, Cicero's story is one of grit, charm, and a relentless pursuit of greatness. It's a reminder that even in the ancient world, a sharp mind and a sharper tongue could take you far, just as long as you had a good toga and a few sestertii to spare. So, Cicero's early life was wrapped in ambition, wit, and the occasional toga mishap. Now let's dive into the meat of his political career, a tale of intrigue, speeches, and a political landscape that makes Game of Thrones look like a tea party. It's 63 BCE, and our man Cicero is riding high as consul of Rome. But if you think this office came with a nice corner villa and a cushy pension, think again. Roman politics was more Hunger Games than House of Cards, with alliances as stable as a Jenga tower in an earthquake. Cicero's consulship is most famous for the Catiline conspiracy, a political thriller that could have been penned by a Roman John Grisham. Lucius Sergius Catilina, or Catiline to his frenemies, was your classic ambitious aristocrat with a penchant for plots. He'd run for consul and lost twice, and was now angling for a more hands-on approach to power, like overthrowing the government. His plan? A coup d'etat complete with arson and gladiatorial backup, because why not add a little spectacle to your treason? Enter Cicero, the man with the golden tongue and a nose for trouble. Armed with more than just rhetoric and a fashionable toga, Cicero sniffed out the conspiracy and decided to go public. What followed were the Catiline orations, a series of speeches that were less State of the Union and more State of the Emergency. With lines that could cut glass, Cicero called out Catiline in the Senate, famously condemning him with the line, "When, O Catiline, do you mean to cease abusing our patience?" It was a verbal smackdown that left Catiline scrambling. But let's not get too carried away with the dramatics. Behind the scenes, things were messier than a toga after a bacchanalian feast. Cicero may have been a master orator, but he was also a shrewd operator. His accusations against Catiline weren't just about saving Rome, they were also about cementing his place in history. Cicero's speeches were strategic masterpieces, designed to rally the Senate and the Roman public, while painting himself as the ultimate defender of the Republic. And while we're on the topic, let's debunk a popular myth. Cicero wasn't always the virtuous defender of democracy he's often portrayed as. Sure, he delivered those devastating orations, but he also engaged in a fair bit of political mudslinging. The Roman Senate was less a place of noble debate and more a wrestling match in togas, with plenty of backhanded compliments and outright insults. Cicero knew how to play the game. He just played it louder, and with more style than most. The fallout from the Catiline conspiracy was swift and brutal. Catiline fled Rome, only to meet his end in a battle against the Roman army, an ignominious end for a would-be usurper. But for Cicero, the victory was bittersweet. He had quashed a rebellion, yet his actions, particularly the execution of Catiline's followers without trial, earned him a few more enemies, including the powerful populist Publius Clodius Pulcher. In Roman politics, if you weren't making enemies, you weren't making progress. Indeed, Cicero's enemy list was longer than a Roman aqueduct. His political maneuvers, while clever, often left him vulnerable to counterattacks. As consul, he had managed to walk the tightrope between the populares and the optimates, but his balancing act was about to get a lot trickier. The political landscape of Rome was shifting, and Cicero's role was becoming increasingly precarious, especially with the rise of figures like Julius Caesar, Pompey, and Crassus, the so-called First Triumvirate that would dominate Roman politics. Now, Cicero wasn't exactly a fan of this trio, particularly Caesar, who was charming, ambitious, and a little too fond of autocratic power for Cicero's tastes. To Cicero, Caesar was the kind of guy who'd steal your thunder and your republic. But, being the astute politician he was, Cicero tried to navigate these waters with his usual blend of charm, caution, and a dash of sarcasm. However, the political tides were turning, and Cicero was about to be swept away in the tumult. In 588 BCE, Cicero found himself exiled from Rome thanks to Clodius, who passed the law targeting anyone who had executed Roman citizens without trial. Sound familiar? Cicero was forced to flee, his political career seemingly in ruins. It was a harsh reminder that in the cutthroat world of Roman politics, even the mightiest orator could find himself silenced. But exile wasn't the end for Cicero. In the grand tradition of political comebacks, Cicero would return to Rome, but let's save that saga for another day. For now, we've got a front-row seat to the rise and fall of one of Rome's most complex figures. Cicero's story is a testament to the power of words, the volatility of politics, and the timeless truth that, in the end, it's not just what you say, but how you say it, and who you manage to offend along the way. Stay tuned, because the drama of Cicero's life is far from over. So, while Cicero was busy playing political ping-pong with Rome's elite, he found time to pen some philosophical thoughts that were as ambitious as his political career. Enter De Re Publica, Cicero's magnum opus on the ideal state. Now, before you start picturing him lounging in a marble villa sipping Falernian wine and philosophizing, let's get real. Writing in ancient Rome was more like shouting into the chaos of a bustling forum, with distractions aplenty and political intrigue lurking behind every column. De Republica wasn't just Cicero's passion project, it was a strategic move. Think of it as both a manifesto and a memoir, a way to cement his legacy as a thinker, not just a talker. This was Cicero's stab at defining the perfect republic, a political utopia where justice reigned supreme and power was checked by reason and virtue. Sound familiar? It's the sort of idealism that gets tossed around even today, usually by folks who conveniently forget to mention the gritty details. Now, Cicero's vision was rooted in the idea of mixed government, a system blending monarchy, the consul, aristocracy, the senate, and democracy, the popular assemblies. In theory, this was a recipe for stability, like a Roman stew with just the right balance of ingredients. But Cicero knew that in practice, Rome's political pot was more likely to boil over than simmer peacefully. The Republic was already a hotbed of corruption and self-interest, and no amount of philosophical seasoning could completely change that. In De Republica, Cicero played the role of the wise old statesman who'd seen it all and had just the antidote for Rome's ills. His dialogue format borrowed a page from Plato's playbook, featuring fictionalized conversations that included Cicero himself as the voice of reason. While this might seem like a humble brag, it was actually a clever way to sidestep the political landmines of the day. If anyone questioned his ideas, he could simply shrug and say, "Hey, it's just a dialogue." But let's not kid ourselves. Cicero's philosophical musings were also a bit of a vanity project. He was acutely aware of his status as a novus homo, and wanted to prove he could philosophize with the best of them, Greeks included. His work was a way to say, look, I can do more than just deliver rousing speeches. I can think, too. And while Cicero's ideas were genuinely insightful, they were also a strategic blend of idealism and self-promotion. Here's where the myth-busting comes in. Was Cicero truly the high-minded philosopher he portrayed himself as, or was he just another politician with a penchant for lofty rhetoric? The truth is, he was a bit of both. Cicero genuinely believed in the power of reason and the virtues of the Republic, but he was also a pragmatist who knew how to navigate the murky waters of Roman politics. It was this duality that made him both revered and reviled. A philosopher-statesman who could wax poetic about justice while simultaneously maneuvering like a political fox. Speaking of maneuvering, Cicero's writings also served as a critique of the power players of his time. While he didn't name names, the subtext was as clear as a Roman aqueduct on a sunny day. His disdain for demagoguery and unchecked power was a not-so-subtle jab at figures like Julius Caesar, whose ambitions often outpaced his restraint. Cicero's ideal republic was one where checks and balances kept would-be tyrants in line. A vision that remains relevant in any era, where power corrupts, is more than just a cliché. While Cicero's De Republica might seem like the ancient equivalent of a TED Talk, it was more than just talk. It was an attempt to influence the political discourse of his time, and a blueprint that would later inspire thinkers during the Renaissance and beyond. Yet, for all its idealism, Cicero's vision was still anchored in the realities of his day, a world where political backstabbing was as common as bread in circuses. Let's not forget the economic context in which Cicero was writing. Rome was a sprawling metropolis with all the chaos that implies. The city was home to about 1 million people, give or take a legion, and it wasn't exactly paradise for the average plebeian. Poverty was rampant, and the gap between the haves and the have-nots could swallow an entire amphitheatre. Cicero's ideal republic might have been a noble goal, but achieving it in such a fractured society was a tall order. Despite these challenges, Cicero's philosophical contributions were a testament to his belief in the power of ideas to shape the world. He wasn't just spouting off for the sake of hearing his own voice, although he probably enjoyed that too. His writings were a call to action, urging Rome to live up to its highest ideals, even as it grappled with its basest instincts. And while we're on the subject of basest instincts, let's talk about Cicero's knack for political doublespeak. He was a master at saying one thing while doing another, a skill that any modern politician would envy. Take his stance on the populares, for instance. Publicly, Cicero often aligned himself with the optimates, Rome's conservative elite, yet he knew when to throw a bone to the populares when it suited his needs. It was a delicate dance, like trying to appease both the Caesar and the Senate without ending up on a prescription list. Cicero's balancing act might seem hypocritical, but it was also a survival tactic. In a world where political fortunes could change faster than a chariot on a downhill slope, adaptability was key. Cicero's ability to pivot and adjust his message depending on the audience was less about deception and more about staying relevant in a cutthroat environment. It's the kind of political finesse that would make Machiavelli nod in approval centuries before the Florentine ever picked up a pen. So, was Cicero's idealism sincere, or was it just another political card to play? The answer lies somewhere in between. Cicero was a man of his time, grappling with the same contradictions that define politics today. He was both an idealist and a realist, a philosopher and a politician, a hero and a flawed human being. His vision for an ideal republic was as much a reflection of his aspirations as it was a commentary on the world he lived in. As we unpack Cicero's philosophical contributions, it's clear that his legacy is not just in the words he wrote, but in the questions he raised. Questions about power, justice, and the role of the individual in the state. These are questions that remain as relevant today as they were in the Roman Forum, and Cicero's life is a reminder that history's greatest thinkers were often its most complex figures. But let's not wrap this up just yet. There's more Cicero to explore. His philosophical musings were only one part of a multifaceted career, and the drama of his life continues to unfold. Stay tuned for the next chapter, where we'll dive deeper into the intricacies of Cicero's later years, his political trials, and the enduring impact of his words, a saga that promises more twists than a toga at a bacchanalian revel. So, as we dive back into the tumultuous waters of Cicero's later political life, let's set the scene. Rome was a tinderbox of ambition, with Julius Caesar, Pompey, and the Senate holding the matches. Cicero, ever the political weather vane, found himself trying to navigate these stormy seas without capsizing. If his earlier years were a masterclass in rhetoric and ambition, this was more like a crash course in survival, with Cicero sometimes looking like the guy who brings a scroll to a sword fight. Here's the lay of the land circa the mid-50s BCE. Rome was not so peacefully transitioning from a republic to, well, something a bit more imperial, thanks to the power plays of the first triumvirate, Caesar, Pompey, and Crassus. Picture a political scene that makes modern election cycles look like a picnic in the park. The Senate, that august body of men who were supposed to uphold the republic, often resembled a group of cats in a burlap sack, each pulling in different directions and scratching for power. Enter Cicero, who, after his brief exile, was back in the Roman limelight, but found himself caught between a rock and a hard place, or more accurately, between Caesar's growing influence and the Senate's waning power. Cicero had always positioned himself as a defender of the Republic, but in a political climate where allegiances shifted faster than a Roman chariot, he had to tread carefully. His involvement in these power struggles was like watching a high-stakes chess game where half the pieces had a mind of their own. Take Pompey, for instance, the great military general, and Caesar's sometimes ally, sometimes rival. Pompey was one of those characters who could throw a party or a coup with equal flair. Cicero initially saw Pompey as a bulwark against Caesar's ambitions, someone who could restore balance to Rome's topsy-turvy politics. But here's the kicker. Pompey wasn't exactly a paragon of republican virtue either. He had his own imperial aspirations, and Cicero, ever the idealist, often found himself out of sync with Pompey's realpolitik. In this political three-ring circus, Cicero's attempts to navigate these alliances often came off as clumsy. Imagine trying to juggle flaming torches while riding a unicycle across a tightrope. That was Cicero's political life. He was in the loop enough to understand the stakes, but often out of touch with the underlying currents of power. His letters from this period reveal a man who could read the room but sometimes failed to anticipate the entire script. Economically speaking, Rome was a beast of its own making. By the time Cicero was trying to play peacekeeper among these titans, the city had ballooned to a population of about 1 million. The economic disparity was as glaring as a midday Roman sun wealth concentrated in the hands of the few, while the masses lived in squalor. This imbalance fueled much of the political unrest, making the streets of Rome ripe for demagoguery and populist uprisings, a fact not lost on Caesar, who was a master at turning the plebeian discontent into political capital. Speaking of Caesar, let's bust a myth while we're at it. Caesar wasn't just the dashing general with a laurel wreath and a penchant for crossing rivers. He was a shrewd operator who knew how to play the populist card like a maestro. His policies often appealed to the common folk, much to the chagrin of the Senate and Cicero, who saw them as a threat to the republican order. Cicero's writings from this time are filled with a mix of admiration and unease towards Caesar's charisma and ambition. He knew Caesar was a force of nature, but he hoped against hope that the republic could harness that energy without being consumed by it. Cicero's stance was a tightrope act without a net. He had to maintain his republican ideals while acknowledging the reality that Rome was changing. The Senate, once the bastion of Roman virtue, was now a fragmented entity, struggling to keep up with the likes of Caesar and Pompey. Cicero's speeches from this period often reflect this tension. Eloquent appeals to tradition peppered with a pragmatism born of necessity. And let's not forget the role of money in all this. Roman politics was a game of influence, and influence required coin. The triumvirs had wealth and soldiers, while Cicero, for all his oratorical prowess, had to rely on his wits and alliances. It's like bringing a finely crafted oration to a dagger fight. Effective in the right setting, but not much use when your opponents are armed to the teeth and backed by legions. As the political climate heated up, Cicero found himself increasingly sidelined. His attempts to mediate between the Senate and the triumvirs often fell on deaf ears, seen as too cautious by some and too radical by others. It was a classic case of being too principled for the pragmatists and too pragmatic for the purists. His letters from this period read like a modern-day Twitter feed, frustrated dispatches from a man caught in the political crossfire, trying to make sense of a world that was rapidly evolving beyond his control. One particular episode during this time that highlights Cicero's precarious position was the conference at Lucca in 56 BCE, where Caesar, Pompey, and Crassus agreed to extend their political alliance. Cicero was not invited, a clear indication of his diminished influence. The triumvirs' agreement effectively sidelined the Senate, with Caesar securing his governorship in Gaul, Pompey and Crassus getting lucrative provinces, and Cicero left to ponder his role in a republic that seemed to be slipping through his fingers. Yet, ever the optimist, Cicero continued to write and speak out for the republic. His speeches and letters from this era are a testament to his belief in the power of words, even when the political reality was stacked against him. He was like the lone voice of reason in a room full of shouting matches, advocating for a return to republican virtues, even as the very fabric of that republic was being unravelled by the ambitions of its power players. So, while Cicero might not have been the kingmaker in this political drama, he was certainly the chronicler, capturing the absurdities and complexities of Roman politics with a sharp wit and a sharper pen. His involvement in these power struggles was less about wielding influence and more about bearing witness, a testament to his belief in the power of rhetoric and reason in a world where might often made right. As we wrap up this segment, remember that Cicero's journey through the power struggles of Rome is far from over. The final chapters of his life would see him continue to navigate the treacherous waters of Roman politics with all the grace of a seasoned sailor caught in a storm. Stay tuned as we delve deeper into the final act of Cicero's life, where the stakes are higher, the alliance is more fragile, and the legacy of Rome hangs in the balance. As we sail into the final act of Cicero's life, let's set the scene with a bit of dramatic irony. The man who spent his life mastering the art of persuasion found himself unable to talk his way out of the political hurricane that was about to engulf him. It's the kind of twist that makes you wonder if the fates were having a laugh at Cicero's expense. Rome was hurtling toward chaos, and Cicero, ever the orator, found that sometimes even the sharpest words are no match for a sharp sword or a political rival with one. By the late 50s BCE, Cicero was back in Rome, but in a republic that was increasingly looking like a historical footnote. The first triumvirate had effectively sidelined the Senate, and Caesar was knee-deep in conquest, busy turning Gaul into his personal fiefdom. Meanwhile, Pompey was playing both sides like a Roman fiddle, and Crassus, the man with more money than Midas, was plotting his own escapades in Parthia. Cicero, caught in this political maelstrom, was trying to keep the republic afloat with little more than his eloquence and a healthy dose of wishful thinking. Our silver-tongued hero was about to face his most formidable adversary yet, Mark Antony, a man who preferred the blunt force of a legion over the subtlety of a syllogism. Antony was a Caesar loyalist through and through, and when Caesar crossed the Rubicon in 49 BCE, essentially declaring war on the Senate, Cicero was faced with a choice harder than choosing between a rock and a hard place. He opted for Caesar, albeit reluctantly, hoping to influence him from within rather than face his wrath from without. But let's be clear, it was less about loyalty and more about survival. Cicero was playing the only card he had left in a deck that was stacked against him. Fast forward to the Ides of March, 44 BCE. Caesar lay dead on the Senate floor, felled by 23 stab wounds, a stark reminder that Roman politics was a literal blood sport. Cicero, never one to let a crisis go to waste, saw an opportunity to restore the Republic. Enter the Philippics, a series of speeches aimed at Antony, designed to rally the Senate against what Cicero saw as the next potential tyrant. Naming them after Demosthenes' fiery orations against Philip of Macedon was a nice touch, though it might have been more prudent to remember how that particular story ended for Athens. Cicero's Philippics were a masterclass in rhetorical savagery. He lambasted Antony with such venom that one might think he was auditioning for a role in a tragicomedy. But, as history would show, bad-mouthing a man with an army wasn't Cicero's smartest move. While he was busy composing verbal haymakers, Antony was building alliances, most notably with Octavian, Caesar's heir, and a young man with ambitions as grand as his adoptive father's. Here's where it all unravelled for Cicero. Despite his best efforts to sway public opinion, he misjudged Octavian, who was less the naive youth Cicero imagined and more a political shark. Octavian and Antony patched things up, forming the second triumvirate with Lepidus, and then did what Romans did best. They drew up a proscription list. History buffs might recall that proscription lists were less about checking it twice and more about checking off enemies. Cicero's name was at the top, and in a twist the Greeks would call hubris, his legendary oratory couldn't save him this time. Cicero met his end on December 743 BCE. He was captured while attempting to flee, and in a scene that would make even Shakespeare wince, his head and hands were cut off and displayed on the rostra in the forum. It was a gruesome punctuation mark on a life defined by words, and a stark reminder that in the politics of ancient Rome, the pen wasn't always mightier than the sword. But let's not end on a note of despair, for Cicero's legacy is far more enduring than his untimely demise. His writings and speeches survived the fall of Rome, influencing Renaissance thinkers and Enlightenment philosophers. His ideas about the Republic, the importance of checks and balances, and the rule of law found new life in the political treatises of figures like Machiavelli, Locke, and Montesquieu. Cicero's belief in the power of reason and moral duty echoed through the ages, shaping modern democratic thought long after the marble of the Forum had crumbled into dust. While Cicero himself couldn't escape the political machinations of his time, his words transcended them. They became a cornerstone of Western political philosophy, a testament to the enduring power of ideas over the ephemeral nature of political power. His life was a reminder that while power may corrupt and absolute power corrupts absolutely, the pursuit of truth and virtue is a worthy endeavour, even in the face of overwhelming odds. So let's raise a proverbial glass to Cicero, not just the man who could talk his way into and out of almost anything, but the thinker whose words outlasted the swords that sought to silence them. His life, a blend of ambition, eloquence, and the occasional misstep, is a story that continues to resonate, proving that even in the harshest of realities, the human spirit's quest for justice and reason endures. In the grand tapestry of history, Cicero's legacy is a vibrant thread, reminding us that while the players may change, the game of politics, with its mix of folly and brilliance, remains timeless. In the grand tapestry of history, Akbar the Great might just be the most unlikely teenage ruler ever thrust into the spotlight, right up there with a certain boy wizard, minus the wand and the magical boarding school. Akbar ascended the throne at the ripe old age of 13, when most of us were still figuring out how to use deodorant. The year was 1556, and the Mughal Empire was a hot mess, teetering on the brink of chaos like a Bollywood dance number gone awry. Picture this. The Mughal Empire, a vast expanse that stretched from Kabul to Bengal, was as stable as a three-legged chair. Humayun, Akbar's dad, had managed to win back the throne just before slipping into the great beyond, leaving his adolescent son to juggle a collection of territories as diverse and unruly as a bag of mixed nuts. Enter Akbar, a kid thrown into the deep end of the political pool without so much as a floaty. And what a pool it was. Within months of his coronation, the empire was tested at the Second Battle of Panipat. Now, if you imagine this battle as some sort of strategic chess match, think again. It was more like a chaotic game of dodgeball, with elephants and muskets instead of red rubber balls. The 13-year-old Akbar, technically the emperor, was parked safely behind the lines while his guardian and regent, Bayram Khan, did the heavy lifting. The opposing forces, led by Himu, a former market vendor turned general, were giving the Mughals a serious run for their money. In a twist of fate that seemed more scripted than real, Himu was struck in the eye by an arrow, effectively handing victory to Akbar's forces. With the dust settled and the battlefield looking like an ancient reenactment of a rock concert mosh pit, Akbar was officially in charge, or as in charge as a teenager in royal robes could be, surrounded by a court full of advisers who were more interested in steering him than in letting him drive. Speaking of those advisers, let's talk about the motley crew that formed Akbar's early court. Imagine a group of older relatives at a family reunion, each with their own idea of how things should be done, all while sneaking sips of spiked punch when they thought no one was looking. Bayram Khan, the most influential of the lot, was like the stern uncle who insists on showing you how to properly grill a steak, whether you asked for the lesson or not. He was a seasoned military leader, sure, but also a bit of a control freak, holding the reins of power tightly while Akbar learned the ropes. Akbar's court was a vibrant mix of cultures, languages, and conflicting agendas. There were Persian nobles who couldn't decide whether they preferred poetry or politics, Rajput chieftains who had as much swagger as they did swords, and a smattering of other regional leaders, each trying to carve out their own little slice of influence. To say it was a challenge would be like calling the monsoon season slightly damp. But young Akbar, despite his youth and the swirling chaos, was no ordinary teen. He was a keen observer, soaking up knowledge like a sponge and learning from those around him. He may not have had a crystal ball, but he had a sharp mind and an instinct for leadership that belied his age. Even the most jaded courtiers couldn't help but notice the glimmers of greatness in him, a future legend beginning to take shape amid the daily grind of ruling an empire. It wasn't all statecraft and swordplay, though. Akbar's early years were also filled with moments of humour and humanity, the kind that remind us that historical figures were indeed human. Take, for instance, Akbar's fondness for animals, particularly elephants, which were not only symbols of power, but also the ancient equivalent of high-status pets. Young Akbar reportedly took great delight in watching elephant fights, a pastime that was equal parts spectacle and strategy session, a medieval version of a Sunday afternoon at the zoo, but with a lot more tusks. The emperor's fondness for elephants didn't stop at mere observation. He was known to ride them into battle, a daring move that was as much about showmanship as it was about strategy. Imagine a teenager today, not just watching a football game but deciding to play quarterback in the Super Bowl, all while tweeting about it. That was Akbar, charging into battle with the gusto of someone who had something to prove, and a lot of people to prove it to. Despite the chaos and occasional moments of comedy, Akbar's early reign set the stage for the grand epic that would follow. Those who underestimated him soon found themselves outmaneuvered by a young monarch who was rapidly coming into his own. The boy who became king at 13 would grow into one of the most celebrated rulers of the Mughal Empire, known for his military prowess, administrative reforms, and a vision for a multicultural empire that was ahead of its time. But in those early years, as he navigated the treacherous waters of imperial politics, Akbar was just a kid trying to keep his head above water in a world full of sharks. He may have been young, but he was learning quickly, guided by a mix of mentors, both wise and overbearing. And as history would prove, this was only the beginning for Akbar the Great, a ruler who would leave an indelible mark on the pages of history. If Akbar's early years were the overture to a grand symphony, his administrative reforms were the crescendo that left everyone tapping their toes and wondering, why didn't someone think of this before? You see, when Akbar looked out over his empire, he didn't just see a patchwork quilt of territories waiting to be stitched together. No, he saw a bustling marketplace, and every good marketplace needs a solid inventory. Enter Akbar's obsession with census data. Forget about the modern-day quants poring over spreadsheets. This guy was doing it before it was cool. By 1582, he had launched a comprehensive census to count everything from the heads of cattle to, well, the heads of people. The census was a monumental task, akin to counting grains of sand on a beach, but Akbar was all in. His empire stretched over 2 million square kilometers, from the icy peaks of the Hindu Kush to the sultry shores of the Bay of Bengal. In the era before Google Maps, getting accurate data was no small feat. Yet Akbar's need for numbers was less about the figures themselves and more about understanding the people behind them. It was like he was saying, I need to know who you are to govern you better, which, admittedly, sounds a lot like a politician's campaign promise. But in Akbar's case, he meant it, mostly. Now, let's talk about the Mansabdari system, a bureaucratic brainchild that was part military, part social media network, and all Akbar. Picture LinkedIn, but instead of endorsements for leadership or Excel, you got ranks and Jaggeria's land grants that could make or break your career. The system was straightforward. Every noble was assigned a rank, or mansab, which determined their salary, status, and the number of troops they were responsible for mustering. It was a clever way to ensure loyalty and efficiency while keeping the military machine well-oiled. The ranks ranged from 10 to 5,000, though some of Akbar's most trusted had mansabs as high as 7,000. That's like getting the platinum membership, complete with all the perks. In theory, it was merit-based, but let's be real. Nepotism had its fair share of cameos. Yet, for all its flaws, the Mansabdari system was a stroke of genius, allowing Akbar to keep tabs on his powerful nobles, much like a modern CEO tracking KPIs. But before we crown Akbar the benevolent monarch of a utopian empire, let's peel back the PR veneer on his so-called tolerance. The narrative of Akbar as a beacon of religious harmony is as enticing as a Bollywood romance, but was it as real? Sure, he abolished the jizya, a tax on non-Muslims, and married Rajput princesses, but was this tolerance or just savvy statecraft? Some historians suggest that Akbar's policy of religious inclusivity was less about altruism and more about maintaining stability. After all, ruling over a diverse empire meant keeping everyone, from Hindus to Sikhs, relatively content. Akbar even went as far as creating a new religion, the Din-Ilahi, a hodgepodge of religious philosophies that was more of a spiritual buffet than a coherent doctrine. He invited leaders from different faiths to debate in his court, the Ibadat Khana, as if hosting the world's first interfaith TED Talk. While this sounds progressive, it was also a strategic masterstroke, a way to dilute potential religious unrest and consolidate power. In essence, Akbar was playing chess while everyone else was stuck in checkers. Now, if the empire's coffers were looking like a teenager's empty wallet when Akbar took over, his financial reforms were the equivalent of finding a magic ATM. The Mughal economy was precarious, teetering like a tightrope walker on a windy day. Akbar needed a financial overhaul, and he looked to land revenue, the lifeblood of any pre-modern empire. Implementing the Todar-Mal Bandobast, named after his brilliant finance minister, Akbar standardized tax assessments based on crop yields over the previous decade. This was a revelation in a time when tax collectors often extracted payments based on whim or coercion. This reform was akin to introducing a fixed salary where there was once only commission-based chaos. It not only stabilized the revenue stream, but also encouraged farmers to produce more, knowing they wouldn't be taxed into oblivion. This system, while not without its critics, was a game-changer, transforming the empire's financial health from a patient and critical condition to one doing jumping jacks in the park. So, was Akbar the enlightened ruler of legend, or was he simply a shrewd operator? The truth, as always, is a little bit of both. His reforms were undoubtedly innovative, reshaping the Mughal administrative and economic landscape. Yet, they were also deeply pragmatic, designed to strengthen his grip on power and ensure the empire's prosperity. Akbar's reign was a dance of idealism and realism, a testament to the complexities of leadership, and while the romance of his legacy endures, the reality is equally compelling, a reminder that even the most storied figures were, in the end, only human. But let's save the rest of the story for another day. There's much more to explore in the life and times of Akbar the Great. As Akbar the Great tightened the administrative screws and filled the empire's coffers, he also had his sights set on something a bit more ethereal: culture. You see, Akbar wasn't just about numbers and battle plans. He was the ultimate patron of the arts, the kind of guy who would have been front row at every Renaissance fair if he'd lived in Europe. His court was a smorgasbord of cultures, a historical equivalent of a multicultural potluck where everyone brought their own dish, be it Persian poetry, Rajput valor, or Turkish tunes. Now, let's talk about Akbar's court, which was less of a royal office and more of a vibrant, chaotic blend of colours, sounds, and ideas. Think of it as the 16th century version of an international conference, minus the lanyards and awkward coffee breaks. Akbar's court employed artists, musicians, poets, and scholars from all over the world, making it a melting pot of creativity and intellect. His palace at Fatehpur Sikri was like the Coachella of culture, an eclectic gathering where the latest in artistic genius and philosophical debates were the main acts. One of Akbar's most ambitious cultural projects was the construction of Fatehpur Sikri itself, a city that rose from the dusty plains like a sandstone mirage. Built between 1571 and 1585, this architectural marvel was Akbar's imperial capital, though it was more of a short-lived experiment than a permanent fixture. The city was designed by architects from across his empire, blending styles like they were mixing cocktails at a royal gala. The result? A city that looked like it was designed by a committee of geniuses on a creative bender. The Jama Masjid, Panch Mahal, and Buland Darwaza were just a few of the jewels in this crown, each whispering tales of grandeur and ambition. But the city's downfall was its lack of water, a small oversight that turned this jewel of urban planning into an extravagant ghost town within a mere 14 years. When it came to music, Akbar was the kind of emperor who would have had a playlist for every occasion. He patronized the legendary Tansen, a musician whose voice was rumored to have magical powers like causing rain or lighting lamps with his singing. Tansen wasn't just any court musician. He was the rock star of his time, a Mick Jagger of the Mughal court who could make even the most stoic noble sway to his tunes. Akbar's support of music and dance was not just about personal entertainment, it was a deliberate policy to integrate various cultural traditions into a singular Mughal identity. Speaking of identity, Akbar's most audacious cultural endeavour was his attempt to create a new religion, Din-Ilahi. Imagine launching a new social media platform and realizing you're the only one following yourself. Din-Ilahi, or the religion of God, was less a faith and more a spiritual umbrella, a synthesis of the best bits from Islam, Hinduism, Zoroastrianism, and Christianity. It was the theological equivalent of a buffet, with Akbar as the curator. But despite his best efforts, Din-Ilahi was about as popular as a salad bar at a barbecue. With only a handful of followers, it never really took off, serving more as a testament to Akbar's visionary, if not entirely practical, imagination. So, why did Akbar invest so heavily in culture and religion? Was it purely for the love of art and spirituality, or was there a deeper political motive? The answer, as with most things Akbarian, is both. By promoting a rich tapestry of cultural expressions, Akbar was weaving together the diverse ethnic and religious threads of his empire, creating a sense of unity among his subjects. His court became a symbol of the empire's inclusivity and cosmopolitan nature, a place where different cultures could coexist under the benevolent gaze of the emperor. Akbar's cultural policies were also a pragmatic move to strengthen his rule. By aligning himself with the cultural elite and promoting a shared identity, he was able to foster loyalty among his subjects, reducing the chances of rebellion and unrest. After all, a happy populace is less likely to rise up with pitchforks, or in this case, swords and arrows. His religious tolerance and innovative policies were a way to placate the empire's diverse populace, ensuring that each group felt they had a stake in the Mughal enterprise. But let's not sugarcoat it. Akbar was still an emperor, and, like any ruler, his policies were as much about maintaining power as they were about uniting disparate peoples. His cultural revolution was a masterclass in statecraft, a way to keep the empire's wheels greased and running smoothly. In truth, Akbar's reign was an intricate dance between idealism and pragmatism, a balancing act that would make even the most seasoned tightrope walker break into a sweat. He was a visionary, yes, but he was also a canny politician who understood that culture and power were two sides of the same coin. And as history would have it, he flipped that coin with remarkable skill, leaving a legacy that was as much about harmony as it was about control. As we delve deeper into Akbar's cultural revolution, one thing becomes clear: this wasn't just a passion project for an emperor with time on his hands. It was a deliberate strategy woven into the very fabric of his rule. So, stay tuned as we unravel more of Akbar's cultural exploits in the upcoming chapters, where the line between legend and reality continues to blur, leaving us with tantalizing stories that echo through the corridors of history. And speaking of blurring lines, let's wade into the murky waters of Akbar's military campaigns. A series of strategic maneuvers that sometimes look more like a sleep-deprived college student's attempt at conquering the world in a board game. Imagine Akbar, not as the mythical warrior king, but as a shrewd tactician with a knack for turning chaos into opportunity. It's time to put those rose-tinted glasses aside and tackle the brutal, often messy reality behind his expansionist dreams. First off, Akbar's conquests were less about romantic notions of chivalry and more about the cold, hard realities of statecraft. Starting with the siege of Chittorgarh in 1567, this wasn't your typical hero versus villain tale. Akbar, with a force of around 80,000 men, laid siege to the Rajput fortress for 4 grueling months. The fortress, a citadel of Rajput pride, was defended by a mere 8,000 warriors and their families. A David and Goliath scenario, if ever there was one. The siege ended in tragedy, with the fortress falling and the defenders choosing Jauhar, a mass self-immolation, rather than surrender. It was a stark reminder that in the annals of history, victory often comes with a steep price tag, one measured in blood and fire. But Akbar wasn't just about brute force. His military campaigns were a masterclass in psychological warfare and political acumen. After all, why fight a battle when you can win allies? Enter the Rajputs, fierce warriors with a penchant for honour and an aversion to submission. Akbar's relationship with them was a complicated dance of diplomacy and dominance. By forging alliances through marriage and granting them autonomy in exchange for loyalty, he turned potential foes into valuable allies. It was a neat trick, akin to offering the carrot while keeping the stick firmly in hand. These marriages, though, were not the love stories of legend. They were carefully calculated moves on Akbar's chessboard of power. When he married the Rajput princess Hahabai, later known as Mariam-uz-Zamani, it wasn't a whirlwind romance but a strategic alliance that would cement the loyalty of the Rajput kingdoms. It was a move that would make Machiavelli proud marriage as a tool of empire building, not a fairy tale romance. And while we're at it, let's debunk another myth. The notion of Akbar's court as a melting pot of harmony belies the political tension that simmered beneath the surface, like a pressure cooker waiting to explode. Speaking of pressure cookers, let's turn our attention to Akbar's southern campaigns, where the Deccan Sultanates became the next big prize. Here, Akbar's expansionist ambitions were as relentless as they were costly. The Mughal army, with its elephants and artillery, was like a juggernaut, slow, cumbersome, but ultimately unstoppable. The conquest of Gujarat in 1573 added a glittering jewel to Akbar's crown, with its bustling ports and lucrative trade routes. But this victory wasn't just about adding land to the empire, it was about controlling the economic lifelines that would ensure Mughal dominance over the subcontinent. Of course, no tale of conquest would be complete without the occasional backfire. Akbar's attempt to subdue the Sultanate of Ahmednagar in 1595 is a case in point. Despite initial successes, the campaign turned into a quagmire, with fierce resistance from the local rulers, turning what should have been a swift victory into a drawn-out slog. It was a harsh lesson in the limits of military might, a reminder that even the most powerful empires can find themselves bogged down in the mud of local resistance. Now, let's not forget the economic underpinnings of Akbar's military campaigns. War, as they say, is an expensive business, and Akbar's treasury was the engine that kept the war machine running. The Todar Mal Bandobast, with its standardized tax system, was the financial backbone that allowed Akbar to fund his expansive ambitions. It was a delicate balancing act, ensuring the empire's coffers were full while avoiding the kind of tax revolts that could topple a less savvy ruler. Yet, for all his military prowess, Akbar's image as a warrior king is often romanticized to the point of distortion. Sure, he was a formidable commander, but he was also a ruler who understood the importance of winning hearts and minds. It wasn't enough to conquer territories, he needed to integrate them into the Mughal fold. His policy of religious tolerance wasn't just a moral stance, but a pragmatic one. Keeping the peace in a diverse empire was as much about strategic alliances as it was about military might. And let's talk about those alliances, a web of relationships that often felt like a soap opera with swords. The Rajputs were both staunch allies and perennial thorns in Akbar's side. Despite marrying into their families, Akbar wasn't immune to betrayal. The Rana of Mewar, Maharana Pratap, famously refused to submit, leading to the Battle of Haldighati in 1576. The battle was a tactical victory for Akbar, but the Rajput resistance continued, a testament to the complexity of loyalty and the limits of imperial power. Akbar's campaigns were a blend of strategy and serendipity, a reminder that history is often less about grand designs and more about seizing the moment. His expansion of the Mughal Empire wasn't just a testament to his military acumen, but also to his ability to adapt and innovate. Whether through marriage alliances, strategic diplomacy, or sheer force of arms, Akbar crafted an empire that was as diverse as it was vast. Yet beneath the grandeur of his conquests lies the harsh reality of empire building, the displacement, the bloodshed, and the uneasy peace that followed every victory. It's a reminder that the romantic image of Akbar as the benevolent conqueror is only part of the story. The other part, the one often glossed over, is the story of power and its discontents, a tale as old as history itself. So, as we continue to explore the life and times of Akbar the Great, let's keep peeling back the layers, revealing the man behind the myth. The story of Akbar's military campaigns is not just a tale of battles won and territories annexed, but a complex narrative of ambition, strategy, and the relentless pursuit of power. Stay tuned as we dive deeper into the saga of Akbar, where every victory is tempered by the realities of empire, and every triumph carries the weight of its consequences. As we unravel the final act of Akbar's saga, let's dive into the twilight of his reign, a period that dances on the edge of history and legend, much like a Shakespearean play with elephants and Mughal regalia. By the time Akbar hit his later years, he'd already amassed an empire that stretched across the Indian subcontinent like an ornate carpet, a testament to his military acumen and political savvy. But even for someone of Akbar's stature, the spectre of legacy loomed large, casting a shadow over his golden years. By the end of the 16th century, Akbar was a seasoned ruler, if not slightly weary from decades of playing the imperial chess game. His administrative and cultural reforms had reshaped the Mughal Empire into a multi-ethnic, multi-religious powerhouse. Yet, as the old adage goes, the higher you climb, the harder you fall, or at least stumble a bit. Akbar's health began to decline, and with it came the inevitable question, who would inherit this glittering empire? Enter Jahangir, Akbar's eldest surviving son, whose previous name, Salim, was as synonymous with rebellion as it was with royal lineage. The transition of power was anything but smooth. Jahangir's youthful indiscretion was legendary. He was the kind of prince who could turn a simple banquet into a bacchanalian revelry. In 1599, eager to claim his inheritance while Akbar was still very much alive, Jahangir declared himself emperor in Allahabad. Akbar, still holding the reins, was less than amused. It was like watching a CEO's heir apparent try to stage a hostile takeover while the old guard was still very much in charge. Akbar, displaying a mix of paternal patience and shrewd statesmanship, managed to rein in Jahangir's ambitions, ensuring the empire remained intact, at least for the moment. But Akbar's concerns weren't just familial, they were fundamentally structural. The very reforms that had once been heralded as groundbreaking, like the Mansabdari system and the Todar Mal Bandobast, were starting to show cracks. The Mansabdari system, initially a merit-based bureaucratic marvel, began to buckle under the weight of nepotism and corruption. Nobles lined their pockets, and jagirs were distributed with more favoritism than impartiality. The once robust administrative machinery started creaking, and Akbar, ever the micromanager, could only watch as his carefully crafted system began to fray. The economic conditions weren't faring much better. The Todar Mal Bandobast had stabilized land revenue, but the agricultural dependency made the empire vulnerable to climatic whims. Famines, like the one in 1595, exposed the fragility of an economy that relied heavily on agrarian output. Despite Akbar's best efforts, the prosperity he had worked to cultivate was at risk, teetering like a tightrope walker after a gust of wind. It was as if the empire's economic fortunes were perpetually caught between feast and famine. Amidst these challenges, Akbar's legacy as a cultural and religious reformer faced its own trials. His Dini-Ilahi, which had never truly caught on, slowly fizzled out after his death, leaving little more than a footnote in the annals of religious history. While his policies of religious tolerance had kept the empire's diverse population relatively harmonious, the ideological unity he envisioned was more mirage than reality. The Mughal Empire, with its patchwork of faiths and cultures, was a testament to Akbar's inclusive vision, but it also hinted at the inherent tensions simmering beneath the surface, a reality that would become increasingly apparent under Jahangir's reign. When Akbar finally shuffled off this mortal coil in 1605, he left behind an empire that was at once magnificent and precarious. Jahangir, inheriting the throne, faced the daunting task of maintaining and expanding a legacy that had been built on both idealism and ruthless pragmatism. Under Jahangir, some of Akbar's reforms began to unravel. The Mansabdari system, once the backbone of Mughal administration, became a breeding ground for inefficiency and corruption. Jahangir's penchant for indulgence over discipline didn't exactly help matters, leading some historians to muse that he was more interested in the empire's wine cellars than its bureaucracy. Yet, despite these shortcomings, Akbar's reign left an indelible mark on the Indian subcontinent. His policies of religious tolerance, progressive governance, and cultural patronage set a standard that would be both admired and emulated by future generations. The Mughal Empire, underpinned by Akbar's vision, became a beacon of cultural synthesis, where art, architecture, and intellectual discourse flourished like a garden in bloom. Akbar's legacy was not just in the territories he conquered or the cities he built. but in the ideas he championed, ideas that would echo throughout history, influencing the socio-political landscape of the region long after his death. In reflecting on Akbar's life, one can't help but marvel at the dichotomy of his image. A visionary leader who was as much a pragmatist as he was a dreamer. His reign was a tapestry woven with threads of ambition, innovation, and, yes, contradiction. While the romance of his legacy has captivated imaginations for centuries, the reality is far more nuanced. Akbar was a master of political spin long before the age of 24-hour news cycles and social media influences. His ability to craft a narrative, to present himself as both conqueror and unifier, was as strategic as any of his military campaigns. So, how might Akbar's life be viewed through today's lens of political spin and media narratives? Perhaps as a prototype for the modern politician, adept at balancing the competing demands of power and principle. In a world where image often trumps substance, Akbar's story serves as a reminder that even the most celebrated figures are, at their core, complex individuals navigating the turbulent waters of leadership. In the end, Akbar the Great was more than the sum of his conquests or the grandeur of his court. He was a ruler who dared to dream, a pragmatic visionary whose legacy continues to shape the contours of history. As we close the chapter on his life, let's carry forward the lessons of his reign, that greatness is not just a destination, but a journey marked by both triumphs and trials. And as we drift off to sleep, let's dream of empires not as mere domains of power, but as intricate tapestries of humanity, woven with the threads of courage, innovation, and, above all, hope. You wake up in Judea, first-century style, with a sun that's not quite as gentle as the Mediterranean postcards promised. The air is laced with the rustic aroma of dust, sweat, and just a hint of impending blisters. You're a Roman legionary, which sounds glamorous until you remember just how much marching is involved. Today, like every other day, you're about to embark on a 20-mile trek. That's right, 20 miles. You might be thinking that sounds like a marathon, but for you, it's just another Tuesday. This isn't a leisurely stroll, it's a logistical masterclass in endurance and stubbornness. As you roll out of your makeshift bed, you can't help but appreciate the ingenuity of the Roman army. The organization is downright impressive. You and your fellow soldiers are the cogs in a machine that extends across 3 continents, a machine that requires precision, discipline, and a good pair of sandals. But don't get too comfortable. The daily grind is as relentless as a Roman tax collector. Now, let's talk about breakfast, the most important meal of the day, or at least that's what they tell you while handing you a bowl of pulse. Pulse is a porridge-like substance made from grains, and it's about as thrilling as it sounds. But hey, it's packed with the carbs you need to tackle the day ahead. The Roman army thrives on these grains, barley, wheat, and millet. You might dream of feasting on roasted boar or sipping fine wine, but the truth is, your diet is primarily gruel. It's all about efficiency and keeping the troops moving, not indulging your inner gourmand. Your pay as a legionary is another wake-up call. You earn about 225 denarii a year, which sounds substantial until you start doing the math. After deductions for food, equipment, and the occasional bribe, because, let's face it, corruption is as ancient as the pyramids. You're left with a fraction of that. But there's a silver lining. You're part of the most formidable military force in the known world. The Roman legions are a symbol of power, discipline, and the all-too-familiar economic burden of empire building. Maintaining an army of this scale is no small feat. The cost of keeping a Roman soldier like you clothed, fed, and armed is equivalent to the GDP of a small village. There's a reason the Roman economy is so tightly interwoven with its military might. Each soldier is an investment, a walking testament to Rome's ambition. The emperor needs you to secure the empire's borders, to expand its reach, and to keep the peace, which, ironically, often means making a lot of noise. As you lace up those caligae, those iconic Roman sandals, you're reminded of their practicality. They're designed with hobnails for traction, an essential feature when you're marching over rocky terrain or through muddy fields. The army's gear is not just about looking formidable, it's about function, efficiency, and a touch of intimidation to keep those pesky barbarians at bay. The legion's economic impact is about more than just the pay you receive. It's a massive enterprise that fuels local economies wherever it goes. Markets pop up around military camps, selling everything from fresh produce to trinkets. The Roman army brings with it a microcosm of Roman life, spreading culture and commerce in its wake. This isn't just about conquering land, it's about exporting a worldview, whether the locals ask for it or not. As you begin your march, you're not just a soldier, you're a piece of the Roman puzzle. Each step you take is a reminder of the empire's reach, of its reliance on the strength of its legions. The road ahead isn't just a physical path, it's a testament to Roman engineering, to the empire's capacity to reshape the world. These roads are the veins of Rome, pulsating with the lifeblood of commerce, communication, and control. And let's not romanticize it too much. Marching 20 miles with a pack that weighs nearly as much as a small child isn't exactly the stuff of legends. But it's what keeps the empire ticking. It's a hard, unyielding reality, but one that underscores the might and fragility of Rome. You're not just maintaining order, you're preserving an empire, one blister at a time. So, as you march beneath the unrelenting Judean sun, remember this. You're part of a grand narrative, one of power, conquest, and the ceaseless grind of empire. It's not always glorious, but it is undeniably significant. And maybe, just maybe, when you finally settle into your camp for the night, you'll find a moment to reflect on the role you play in this sprawling Roman epic. Until then, you march on, because in the Roman army, the sun never sets on a day's work. As you trudge through the dusty streets of Judea, your sandals kicking up clouds of history under the harsh sun, you begin to feel the weight of more than just your armor. Welcome to the political pressure cooker that is first-century Judea, where Roman authority and Jewish governance are locked in a delicate dance of power, politics, and a fair share of awkward glances across the marketplace. This land is a crucial chess piece in Rome's eastern strategy, and you, dear legionary, are one of the pawns tasked with keeping the game running smoothly. Judea isn't just any province, it's a strategically vital link in the Roman Empire's eastern flank, acting as a buffer between Rome and the Parthian Empire. Don't let those rolling hills fool you. This is geopolitical turf that makes modern-day political squabbles look like a playground dispute over the last swing. The Roman legions here are not just patrolling streets, but enforcing the Pax Romana, that grand concept of Roman peace, which, spoiler alert, often involves a lot of not-so-peaceful enforcement. As you patrol, you can't help but notice the unique blend of cultures around you. This isn't a simple case of conqueror and conquered, it's a complex tapestry woven from the threads of Roman ambition and Jewish tradition. The locals are deeply rooted in their customs, and the Romans, in all their imperial wisdom, have appointed a local king, Herod Agrippa, to keep things somewhat balanced. This move is less about benevolence and more about practicality. Nothing like a local face to help smooth over the imposition of foreign rule. Herod, a client king under the thumb of the Roman emperor, acts as a liaison of sorts, juggling the expectations of his Roman overlords and the needs of his people. It's a tightrope act worthy of any Cirque du Soleil performer, with the stakes significantly higher than a standing ovation. Your presence here is a constant reminder of Roman authority, but it's also an economic boon. The logistics of maintaining a military force in a region as volatile as Judea are mind-boggling. Supplies must be shipped over great distances, and the cost of feeding, clothing, and equipping the legions is matched only by the complexity of managing the supply chains that stretch from Rome itself. The Roman military isn't just a fighting force, it's a mobile economy, a travelling circus of commerce that leaves a trail of economic activity wherever it goes. Local markets thrive on the business brought by the soldiers, from selling food and supplies to the more, let's say, recreational services that inevitably accompany a large group of men far from home. But let's not sugarcoat it. The Romans are here to maintain control, and that control sometimes requires a firm hand. The Jewish population is diverse, with factions ranging from those who begrudgingly tolerate Roman rule to the zealots who'd rather eat their own sandals than submit quietly. You, as a legionary, are caught in the middle of this tension, a walking symbol of Roman power and, simultaneously, the target of simmering local resentment. As you weave through the bustling marketplace, you're acutely aware of the watchful eyes around you. This isn't paranoia, it's a fact of life. Judea is a hotbed of potential unrest, a tinderbox where the slightest spark could ignite revolt. The Jewish revolt of 66 AD is still a few decades away, but the seeds of discontent are being sown in the very streets you patrol. The air is thick with the murmurs of discontent, the whispers of rebellion that float through the market stalls like the scent of fresh dates and spices. The strategic importance of Judea to the Roman Empire can't be overstated. It acts as a buffer zone, a barrier against the Parthian Empire, and a vital link in the chain of provinces that stretch across the eastern Mediterranean. The Romans, masters of infrastructure, have invested heavily in maintaining roads, ports, and fortifications here, ensuring that the empire's influence can be projected efficiently and effectively. These are the arteries that ensure the lifeblood of the empire flows smoothly, but they're also the pathways that rebellions could use to spread like wildfire. And speaking of investment, let's talk numbers. The Roman military budget is a mammoth beast, consuming up to 80% of the empire's total expenditures. A single legion could cost upwards of 100 million sesterces annually, a staggering sum that underscores just how critical military presence is to Rome's strategy. The soldiers, including you, are both the cost and the insurance policy, a living testament to the empire's commitment to its territorial holdings. So, as you continue your patrol, try to appreciate the intricate balance at play here. You're not just enforcing order, you're a cog in a much larger mechanism, one that's trying to maintain peace in a land that's as politically charged as it is sacred. The streets you walk are steeped in history, every stone a witness to the ebb and flow of empires, religions, and the all-too-human drama of power. In Judea, the past is never far behind, and the future is always uncertain. The political climate is a complex blend of ambition, faith, and the harsh reality of living under foreign rule. As a legionary, you're at the heart of this tension, a foot soldier in a grand narrative that's as fragile as it is formidable. The streets of Judea are more than just pathways through a bustling province. They're the stage upon which the Roman Empire's future is being played out, one patrol at a time. Remember, in this land of prophets and kings, where every corner has a story and every face a history, your role is both monumental and minuscule. You're a part of the Roman system, a guardian of its ambitions and a witness to its challenges. And as you march through these ancient streets, know this: the empire's might is only as strong as the peace it can maintain, and that peace, though often uneasy, rests on your weary, sandaled feet. And just as you're contemplating the weight of your role in this grand empire of marble and might, the noon sun reminds you that soldiering isn't just about maintaining order. It's about survival, yours and the empire's. Welcome to the midday reality check. Roman legionary life is a grind, and it's time to face the less glamorous sides of this military machine. First up, the military hierarchy. It's a layered cake of authority, with you somewhere near the base, holding up the deliciously complex structure of centurions, legates, and tribunes. Your immediate superior, the centurion, is a seasoned, grizzled figure who's seen more campaigns than you've had hot meals. He's the linchpin in this operation, keeping the rank and file in line with a mix of discipline and the occasional brutal reminder of who's in charge. Centurions, by the way, earn about 3,750 denarii a year, considerably more than your meagre 225. But they've earned it by surviving the kind of battles that would make lesser men weep into their polls. Now, let's talk about the myth of Roman invincibility. It's a legend as old as the empire itself, bolstered by tales of unstoppable legions marching over the known world like a well-oiled war machine. But here's the kicker: reality is messier. Even the most disciplined army can stumble, especially when facing foes who know the land better than the Romans know their own formations. Take the guerrilla tactics of local insurgents. They don't play by the rules of orderly Roman warfare. They use the landscape to their advantage. The Judean hills, a picturesque backdrop of olive groves and rocky outcrops, become a nightmare of ambushes and surprise attacks. Your training is thorough, yes, but it's based on open-field battles, not hit-and-run skirmishes. This isn't the flat plains of Gaul. This is a tactical chess game where every rock and ravine is a potential enemy. The Roman legions are formidable, but they're also a bit like a Swiss watch, brilliantly crafted but not designed for being thrown into a sandstorm. When faced with unpredictable guerrilla warfare, the Roman formation, the testudo or tortoise, has its limits. Sure, It's great for deflecting arrows and the odd spear, but it's not exactly nimble in a narrow pass or when you're being pelted with rocks from above. You've got to admire the locals for their ingenuity. When you can't beat the Romans head-on, you make them dance to a different tune. Then there's the issue of local dissent. Judea is a hotbed of unrest, with groups like the Zealots itching to throw off the Roman yoke. These aren't just isolated rebels. They're part of a broader network of resistance, fueled by a combination of religious fervour and political ambition. The Zealots are the kind of people who'd rather fight to the last man than see their land under foreign rule. For them, the Roman Empire is less a majestic civilization and more an oppressive regime that must be resisted at all costs. And let's not forget about the infamous Sicari, named for their trademark daggers, who specialize in assassinations and inciting chaos in the crowded streets of Jerusalem. Their strategy is as much psychological as it is physical, aiming to destabilize Roman control by turning every street corner into a potential flashpoint. This is asymmetric warfare in its purest form, and it's your job to keep the peace, or at least a semblance of it. The legion's response to these challenges is typically Roman, methodical, relentless, and often brutal. When diplomacy fails, retribution is swift. Villages suspected of harbouring insurgents are razed, crops destroyed, and captives taken as deterrents to further rebellion. It's a harsh tactic, and one that sits uncomfortably with the image of Roman civilization as a beacon of order and culture. But here's the unvarnished truth. Maintaining an empire isn't always pretty. Sometimes it's downright ugly. Economically, these campaigns are a drain on resources, but the Romans view them as necessary expenses. Securing Judea is about more than just military control. It's about safeguarding trade routes and ensuring the flow of goods and taxes to Rome. The empire is a vast, interconnected web, and every province, including this rebellious corner of the empire, plays a crucial role in keeping the whole thing from unravelling. So, as you sweat under your armour, marching through this rugged landscape, remember that you're part of a system that's trying to balance the carrot and the stick. You're here to enforce Roman law, yes, but also to help integrate these territories into the broader tapestry of the empire. It's a delicate dance, one that requires both strength and subtlety. The afternoon sun casts long shadows, both literal and metaphorical, as you continue your patrol. The roads ahead are fraught with challenges, and the myth of Roman invincibility is as much about perception as it is about reality. You're not invulnerable, but you are part of a force that's managed to conquer and maintain an empire that stretches from Britain to Egypt. That's no small feat. As you trudge on, consider this. The strength of the Roman Empire lies not just in its legions, but in its adaptability. It's a living organism, one that learns from its defeats as much as its victories. The Romans have a saying, "Si vis pacem, para bellum," if you want peace, prepare for war, and boy, are you prepared. The road is long, and the challenges are many, but each step you take is a testament to the resilience and ambition of an empire that refuses to be defined by its limitations. You march through history, a living part of its grand narrative with all its triumphs and contradictions. So, keep your sword sharp, your shield ready, and your wits about you. This isn't just about surviving another day, it's about playing your part in a story that's been unfolding for centuries. And as the sun begins its descent, casting a golden glow over the rugged terrain, you march on, ever forward, into the pages of history. As the sun dips below the horizon, casting Judea in shades of gold and purple, you finally get a breather from the day's relentless grind. The evening brings a change of pace, and with it, a glimpse into the social life of a Roman legionary. You might expect evenings to be full of grandiose banquets and tales of heroism, but brace yourself. Reality often comes dressed in the simpler garb of camaraderie and shared hardships. Let's start with the barracks, your home away from home. If home means cramming into a space tighter than a toga on a senator after a particularly lavish feast. But here's the thing. These cramped quarters forge bonds stronger than any bronze shield. You're living with men who've marched the same miles, faced the same dangers, and yes, eaten the same questionable pulls. This isn't just a group of soldiers. It's a brotherhood bound by shared grit and the occasional gripe about the centurion's dubious orders. Speaking of camaraderie, let's talk contubernium. This is your squad, a group of 8 to 10 men who share a tent, a cooking fire, and the joy of cleaning each other's caligae when the mud gets particularly clingy. It's a small unit within the larger legion, and it's where the real magic happens. You work together, eat together, and occasionally, when the stars are aligned, find time for a laugh or two. Humour, after all, is a soldier's best weapon against the absurdities of war. Entertainment, you ask? The Roman military culture is surprisingly rich in ways to pass the time. Forget Netflix. You've got dice games, board games like Le Tranquil, an ancestor of chess with a name that sounds like a sneeze, and even a bit of gambling to spice up the monotony. And when the stakes are higher than usual, the winnings can be as thrilling as a gladiatorial bout in the Colosseum. Then there's the theatre of war itself, literally. Roman camps often include makeshift amphitheatres where troops can watch performances. Nothing like a good tragedy to remind you that no matter how rough your day's been, at least you're not Oedipus. Or, if you're lucky, the camp might host a mime troupe. Think of it as Roman slapstick. It's crass, it's ridiculous, and it's a welcome distraction from the reality of life on the frontier. Now, let's dive into the personal ambitions stewing beneath those helmets. The Roman army isn't just a career, it's a ladder, albeit a slippery one, to social mobility. Promotions are the golden tickets. Literally, since more rank means more denarii in your pouch. A legionary could rise to the rank of centurion if he played his cards right, or, more accurately, if he displayed enough valour to catch a superior's eye. Centurions, those demigods of discipline, earn 15 times a legionary's base pay. Not bad for a life lived on the edge of a gladius. But don't be fooled into thinking everyone's angling for a promotion. Some soldiers are content to serve their 25 years, yes, that's right, 25, and retire with a plot of land, courtesy of the Roman state. It's a long-term investment in loyalty, one that ties a soldier's future to the prosperity of the empire. And let's face it, the promise of a small farm and a quiet life can be as tempting as a siren's song after decades of marching and fighting. The personal lives of these soldiers are a tapestry of ambition, loyalty, and the occasional dalliance with local customs. While Roman law prohibits soldiers from marrying during service, love, or something like it, finds a way. Relationships with local women are common, and though they might not be officially recognized, they're as real as the spears stacked outside your tent. These relationships can be a double-edged sword, bringing both companionship and complication, especially when children enter the picture. Despite the regulations, many legionaries leave behind families upon retirement, a testament to the resilience of love against the rigidity of Roman bureaucracy. And when you finally hang up your helmet, there's a good chance you'll take your family with you to that promised plot of land, blending Roman and local traditions into a new, hybrid culture. As night descends, you feel the weight of the day lifting slightly, replaced by the camaraderie of shared stories and aspirations. The crackling of the campfire provides a soundtrack to the laughter and murmured conversations. You're part of a fellowship that transcends the battlefield, a network of men bound by duty and the pursuit of something greater than themselves. Life in the Roman army is a study in contrasts between the harsh realities of military service and the rich tapestry of human connection that makes it bearable. While the empire's reach is vast, it's the stories of its soldiers, the unsung heroes of history, that truly bring its past to life. Each legionary is a thread in the fabric of Rome, weaving tales of endurance, ambition, and the simple joys of shared humanity. So here you are, a Roman legionary under the Judean stars, living a life that's both ordinary and extraordinary. You're a cog in the imperial machine, yes, but you're also part of a brotherhood that laughs in the face of adversity and finds solace in shared stories and dreams. And as you drift into sleep, the sounds of the campfire fading into the night, you know that tomorrow will bring more of the same challenges and the same opportunities to forge bonds that will last a lifetime. The night is young, and the empire vast. You are a part of its story, and it yours. In the grand tapestry of history, it's the human threads, the lives lived in the shadows of greatness, that shine the brightest. So rest well, soldier. Tomorrow's march awaits, and with it another chapter in the enduring saga of Rome. As you drift into sleep, the sounds of the campfire fading into the night, a mosaic of thoughts and reflections swirl in your mind, settling into a tapestry of what it truly means to be a Roman legionary in Judea. The day's experiences, from the unyielding march to the complex social dynamics, invite you to ponder the larger narrative of the Roman military machine and its legacy. Let's tackle the romanticized image of the Roman soldier first. When you think of a Roman legionary, images of stoic warriors clad in gleaming armor, marching triumphantly across conquered lands might spring to mind. But here's the reality check. Being a Roman soldier was less about basking in glory and more about enduring a relentless grind. Forget the Hollywood glamour. You were more likely to be battling lice in your tunic than basking in the laurels of victory. The truth is, the Roman army ran on sweat, grit, and a hefty dose of pragmatism. It wasn't all conquests and triumphs. It was also a daily struggle for survival, both for the soldiers and the empire itself. Economically speaking, the Roman military was an expensive beast to feed. Picture this. Each legion required vast amounts of resources, money, food, and supplies to function. A single legion could cost the empire upwards of 100 million sesterces annually, a figure that would make any ancient accountant break out in a cold sweat. The soldiers weren't just defenders of the empire, they were also participants in a massive economic engine, fueling local economies wherever they were stationed. But this wasn't just about economics, it was about power projection. The sheer scale of the Roman army was a testament to the empire's ambition and its willingness to invest heavily in maintaining its dominion. Now, let's talk about the gritty reality of empire building. The Roman Empire didn't expand by accident. It was a calculated endeavor driven by a mix of ambition, necessity, and often ruthless efficiency. While the allure of expanding territories might sound appealing, the reality involved significant challenges. Maintaining control over such a vast expanse required a constant military presence, demanding loyalty and discipline from soldiers who were often stationed far from home. The Roman legions, with their famous discipline and organization, were the backbone of this effort, but they were also the face of Roman authority in foreign lands. This dual role meant that soldiers were often caught between enforcing Roman rule and managing local tensions, a precarious balancing act that didn't always end well. The Roman military strategies that evolved over centuries have left an indelible mark on modern warfare. The concept of a professional standing army, trained and ready to deploy at a moment's notice, owes much to the Roman model. The Romans perfected the art of logistics, ensuring that their legions could march long distances and still be combat-ready upon arrival, a feat that modern military planners still admire. Their use of engineering in warfare, from building roads to constructing siege engines, laid the groundwork for future military innovations. And while the tactics and technology may have changed, the fundamental principles of Roman military organization, discipline, adaptability, and strategic planning remain relevant today. Reflecting on the day's experiences, it's clear that the life of a Roman legionary was a microcosm of the empire itself, complex, resilient, and often paradoxical. You were part of a grand narrative, one that combined the romance of conquest with the harsh realities of imperial maintenance. The Roman military wasn't just about battles and victories. It was about sustaining an empire that stretched across 3 continents, an empire that left a legacy as enduring as the roads it built. So, as you lie under the Judean stars, consider the impact of your role in this vast machine. You're not just a soldier, you're a piece of history, a thread in the intricate tapestry of Roman ambition and endurance. The lessons of the Roman military, its strategies, its challenges, and its triumphs continue to echo through the ages, shaping the course of history and influencing the world long after the last legionary hung up his gladius. In the quiet of the night, as the shadows of history envelop you, take pride in your part in this enduring saga. The legacy of the Roman military is not just one of conquest, but of innovation, resilience, and the relentless pursuit of power. It's a story that resonates through time, a testament to the enduring spirit of an empire that, despite its flaws and failures, left an indelible mark on the world. And as you drift into dreams of battles won and roads yet to be travelled, know that you are a living chapter in this epic tale, a testament to the enduring strength and ambition of the Roman Empire. Rest well, soldier, for tomorrow brings another day in the life of a Roman legionary, another step in the march of history. You awake to the sound of roosters crowing and the faint smell of smoke from the hearth. Welcome to a morning in 11th century England where you're not just any old peasant stumbling around in the mud. No, you're a Norman knight, which sounds incredibly grand until you realize that it mostly means you've got more chores before breakfast than most people have all day. Forget the movie glamour, your day kicks off with something less regal and more real porridge. That's right. While modern fantasies might have you dining on exotic fruits and honeyed pastries, the truth is, your breakfast is the medieval equivalent of oatmeal. It's hearty, sure, but about as exciting as a damp day in Dover. This is not to say you're not eating well. In fact, your status as a knight means you have access to better grub than the average serf. And hey, if you're lucky, there's a slab of bacon or some cheese to liven things up. Bread, thick and coarse, might make an appearance, but don't expect it to be the fluffy, crusty loaf of your dreams. It's more like a dense, chewy brick that could double as a weapon in a pinch. Now, why are we talking about breakfast, you ask? Well, because the daily diet of a knight, contrary to popular belief, was more about function than luxury. You need those carbs and proteins to fuel a day that involves more than just lounging around in a castle. The economics of food in this era are pretty fascinating. You see, the Norman conquest didn't just shake up the political landscape, it also introduced new agricultural practices. Wheat became a staple, and while you might enjoy a bit of venison now and then, most of your protein comes from pigs and cows, animals that are easier and cheaper to maintain. Let's talk logistics. Feeding a knight isn't just about what goes on your plate, it's about the entire food chain that supports your lifestyle. Your estate, or the lands you oversee, produces most of what you eat. The peasants who work these lands pay rent in the form of crops, livestock, and labour. This feudal system is the backbone of your diet and, by extension, your ability to fulfill your knightly duties. It's a complex dance of economics and obligation, where the balance between feast and famine is a constant concern. And speaking of duties, let's not forget the armour. Ah, the iconic shining armour, the stuff of legends and countless Halloween costumes. But here's the kicker. In real life, it's not always the gleaming, flawless metal you see on screen. Your armour is a carefully crafted suit of chainmail, or maybe if you're really well off, a mix of chainmail and plate. A single suit can weigh anywhere from 20 to 25 kilograms, and that's just the mail. Add on a helmet, shield and sword, and you're lugging around a small anvil's worth of gear. Armour isn't just about looking intimidating, it's a significant investment. A decent suit could cost the equivalent of a small village's annual income. That's why taking care of it is as much a part of your routine as polishing your sword or training your horse. Rust is the enemy, and keeping your armour in fighting condition is a full-time job in itself. Forget the myth of the dashing knight who tosses his armour aside after a long day. You're scrubbing that thing down like it's your second skin. Your armour might not sparkle, but it serves a crucial purpose. In an age where battles are fought up close and personal, your mail coat is the difference between returning home in triumph or being carted off in a sorry state. And let's not ignore the logistics of acquiring such gear. Crafting armour involves skilled labour. Blacksmiths, leather workers and tailors all play a role in ensuring you're battle-ready. It's a meticulous process, one that underscores the importance of craftsmanship in medieval society. Why does all this matter? Because being a knight isn't just about the battlefield heroics that bards sing about. It's about the nitty-gritty of daily life, the economic and social systems that sustain you. It's about understanding that the romantic image of chivalry and grandeur is built on a foundation of hard work, sweat, and, let's face it, a lot of porridge. Your morning might start with breakfast, but it's the interwoven threads of duty, economy, and practicality that define your day. So, as you polish off what's left of that humble meal, remember, the life of a Norman knight is far more complex and compelling than any romanticized tale would have you believe. So, with your porridge now a distant memory, it's time to saddle up and head out to inspect your lands. That's right, you're halfway between a knight and a landlord, and the feudal system is as much about management as it is about might. Picture this. Your estate isn't just a plot of dirt with a few sheep, it's the beating heart of your power. Your own little corner of England carved out by conquest and maintained by contracts. Let's talk about feudalism, that infamous pyramid scheme of medieval Europe. It's all about land, loyalty, and a dizzying hierarchy that makes corporate org charts look like child's play. You, as a Norman knight, are part of this grand structure, with obligations running both up and down the chain. At the top sits the king, the ultimate landlord. He's got the most real estate and, conveniently, the most clout. Below him are the barons, dukes, or earls. Call them the middle managers of the medieval world. They've been granted vast swathes of land, and in return they owe the king military service and a portion of the profits. And then there's you. You've been given a chunk of land by one of these barons in exchange for your allegiance and, of course, your skills with a sword. In this system, loyalty isn't just a virtue, it's a currency. Your land, or fief, is the source of your wealth, but it comes with strings attached. You owe service to your lord, which could mean anything from showing up for a few weeks of battle each year to simply providing a couple of horses. In return, you get to live off the produce of your estate and keep any serfs or peasants in line. Ah, the serfs. Let's not forget them. They're the ones tilling the soil, raising the livestock, and generally making sure you don't have to lift a finger unless it's to lift a sword. But don't picture them as slaves. They're more like tenants with really bad lease agreements. They're bound to the land, not allowed to leave without permission, and pay rent through labour and products. Remember, this is a time when freedom is a concept with a lot of asterisks attached. As you ride through your estate, you'll notice the patchwork of fields and pastures, each one meticulously divided. This isn't just a random assortment of crops, it's an economic engine, with every square foot planned to maximize productivity. Wheat for bread, barley for ale, and somewhere tucked away a few rows of vegetables for variety. And let's not forget your livestock: cows for milk and beef, sheep for wool, and pigs for, well, just about everything else. Managing all this is no small feat. You're not just a knight, you're a business manager, overseeing everything from crop rotation to conflict resolution. And speaking of conflicts, they're not always of the sword and shield variety. Disputes over land boundaries or grazing rights can be just as fierce and require just as much tact. You might find yourself acting as a judge, weighing the claims of one peasant against another, trying to keep the peace and ensure that everyone pays their dues. Now, let's talk numbers. A good-sized estate might run a few hundred acres, which sounds impressive until you realize that it's not just yours to do with as you please. Divided into strips and parcels for different families to farm, it's a patchwork under constant negotiation. The Doomsday Book, that monumental survey ordered by William the Conqueror in 1086, lists holdings meticulously. It's like the medieval version of a tax return, and just as thrilling. But all this responsibility comes with risks. Bad harvests, disease, or even an unruly vassal can throw a wrench in the works. And let's not forget the ever-present threat of war. A neighbouring lord might eye your lands with envy, or a rebellion could flare up, threatening your carefully balanced fiefdom. This is where those armoured skills come in handy. Sometimes you've got to defend what's yours the old-fashioned way, by force. Despite the romanticised image of knights in shining armour, the reality is closer to modern-day property management than epic cinema battles. Contracts and ledgers are as crucial as your sword, and success depends on diplomacy as much as it does on daring-do. In this world, power is as much about paper and ink as it is about blood and steel. The contracts you hold are your lifeline, detailing obligations and rights, ensuring you know exactly what's expected of you and what you expect of others. Feudalism is often portrayed as an ironclad system where everyone knows their place, but the truth is a bit messier. Loyalties shift, obligations change, and the hierarchy that seems so solid is, in reality, a constantly shifting web of alliances and rivalries. It's a game of chess with real stakes, where every move could mean the difference between prosperity and ruin. As you make your rounds, inspecting fields and talking to your tenants, you're reminded that being a knight is as much about governance as it is about gallantry. Sure, you've got the sword and the armour, but your real power lies in your ability to manage land and people. It's not as glamorous as the tales might suggest, but it's the reality of life in 11th century England. Every decision you make can ripple through your estate, affecting not just your livelihood, but the lives of everyone who depends on you. And so, as the sun begins to dip toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the fields, you head back to your manor. You've got contracts to review, disputes to mediate, and perhaps, just perhaps, a moment to reflect on the complex tapestry of loyalty, obligation, and power that defines your world. Tomorrow will bring new challenges and opportunities, new chances to wield not just the sword, but the pen, in the never-ending quest to hold your place in a realm where nothing is ever truly secure. As you kick off your boots and settle in for a brief respite, the reality of life on the estate is a reminder that even knights need a break from the ceaseless grind of medieval management. But hold on to your chainmail, because the afternoon is about to kick into high gear with something every knight worth his salt must face: training. And let me tell you, it's not the glamorous affair of choreographed duels and choreographed swordplay that the movies have sold you. Forget the romantic image of the gallant knight squaring off in a fair fight under the watchful eye of a lady with a hanky. Real training is more akin to a medieval boot camp. It's brutal, exhausting, and relentless. You're not just swinging a sword, you're preparing for the chaos of battle where things happen fast and mistakes are costly. Imagine a mix of CrossFit and tactical drills with a side of life or death stakes. You'll spend hours perfecting your swordsmanship, practicing thrusts and parries until your arms feel like they're made of lead. And it's not just swords. Lances, maces, and axes all get their turn. Each weapon has its own technique, its own weight, and you've got to master them all. The idea is to make these movements instinctual, because on the battlefield, thinking too long can mean the difference between a hero's welcome and a hasty burial. And then there's the lance. The iconic knightly weapon that's as much about skill as it is about raw power. Jousting might sound like medieval fun, but training with a lance is a harsh reminder that accuracy isn't just a skill, it's a survival mechanism. You'll practice charging at targets, honing your aim and balance, because believe it or not, it's harder than it looks to hit a target at full gallop while trying not to get unseated by the force of your own strike. Speaking of galloping, let's talk about the unsung heroes of your knightly exploits, your warhorses. These aren't your average plough-pulling ponies. A destrier, the preferred mount for combat, is a veritable tank on 4 legs. These beasts are bred for strength and endurance, capable of carrying a fully armoured knight into the thick of battle without breaking a sweat. But here's the kicker. Maintaining these equine powerhouses is an expensive endeavour. Feeding a warhorse is like feeding a small army, and the costs add up. In an era where resources are as tight as a miser's purse strings, every oat and hay bale counts. A well-fed destrier is crucial for maintaining your battlefield prowess, but keeping one in top condition can cost as much as a modest estate's annual yield. And that's before you factor in the cost of stabling, grooming, and veterinary care. Yes, even back then, horses had their version of health checkups. The economic implications of this are immense. The costs associated with maintaining warhorses can influence political decisions as much as any sword or treaty. Need to levy a new tax? Better make sure your destriers are in prime condition, because disgruntled subjects are less likely to comply if they sense weakness. Your horse is as much a symbol of power as it is a tool of war, and keeping it healthy is a full-time job. Now, you might wonder how all this training ties into the grander scheme of things. Well, training isn't just about sharpening skills, it's about readiness. In a time when borders are as fluid as allegiances, being battle-ready is a constant necessity. Whether it's quelling a rebellious vassal or defending against a rival lord's incursion, you've got to be prepared. And this isn't just about you, it's about the men you lead. A knight's retinue, often composed of squires and foot soldiers, trains alongside you, ensuring that everyone can function as a cohesive unit when the banners are unfurled. Historical texts paint a clear picture of this rigorous routine. The Assize of Arms of 1181, for instance, mandated that knights of certain wealth maintain specific arms and armour, underlining the importance of preparedness in the feudal military system. It was a legal decree that broadcast the seriousness of martial readiness across the realm, a stark contrast to the myth of knights as free-roaming adventurers. And let's not gloss over the sheer physicality required. You're lugging around armour that weighs as much as a preteen, trying not to collapse from heatstroke while you practice your moves. It's a grueling test of strength and stamina where only the fittest survive. Remember, the romantic tales of knights in shining armour often skip the part where they're sweating buckets under the midday sun, every muscle screaming in protest. But all this isn't just for show. The reality of medieval warfare is chaotic and brutal, a far cry from the tournament grounds where lances are blunted and honour is the currency of the day. In battle, there's no referee to call time out, no audience clapping politely from the stands. It's a melee of clashing steel and shouting men, where every advantage counts and every mistake is paid for in blood. So, as you stagger back to the barracks, exhausted and drenched in sweat, remember that all this effort is what keeps you alive. Sure, the stories might gloss over the hard work in favor of the glory, but without the sweat and discipline of training, there wouldn't be any legends for the bards to sing. It's a symphony of grit and determination, where every note is struck in the pursuit of survival. And as the sun dips lower, washing the world in the golden hues of dusk, you can afford a moment to relax. Tomorrow will bring new challenges and the same relentless routine. But tonight you've earned your rest, because in the life of a Norman knight, the grind never truly ends. It just pauses long enough for you to catch your breath. And just as you're about to sink into the sweet oblivion of a well-earned nap, duty calls once more. No rest for the weary, right? It's time to mount up and head over to your lord's castle, where the real Game of Thrones is played, not with dragons and direwolves, but with words and wits sharper than any blade. Welcome to the medieval political scene, where alliances are as delicate as a soufflé and twice as likely to collapse. First, let's talk about the castle itself. Forget the fairy tale turrets and shimmering moats. Your lord's stronghold is more fortress than fantasy. It's a stone behemoth, designed to withstand sieges, not to host tea parties, built with the kind of thick walls that'd make a bank vault look flimsy. It's a testimony to the paranoia and pragmatism of medieval nobility. The architecture speaks volumes. In these halls, power is the currency, and everyone's a trader. As you clatter through the gatehouse, you're not just entering a building, you're stepping onto the stage of a complex political theatre. Here, every smile is calculated, every nod weighed for its political heft. Welcome to the medieval court, a living chessboard, where you're both a piece and a player. Consider it a high-stakes poker game, but instead of chips, you're betting land, loyalty, and sometimes your life. Now, let's bust a few myths while we're at it. Chivalry, that vaunted code of honor, is less about valor and more about power dynamics. Sure, it's easy to romanticize knights as noble warriors bound by honor, but the reality is far messier. Chivalry is a tool, a social lubricant, greasing the wheels of feudal politics. It's the medieval version of corporate jargon, a set of rules that look good on parchment, but are often bent when the stakes get high. You're here today not just to pay your respects, but to navigate the labyrinthine politics that bind you to your lord. The big theme? Loyalty, which is as flexible as a politician's promise. Your presence here is a reminder of feudal obligations, those invisible chains that tie you to the whims of your superiors. And if you think today's politics are cutthroat, medieval politics are a whole new level of ruthless. You see, every handshake, every gesture is loaded with meaning, as alliances shift with the wind. In this world, treaties and charters are the legal lifelines. They're as dry as old parchment, sure, but they're the backbone of political manoeuvring. These documents hold the power to make or break fortunes. Take the Magna Carta of 1215 as an example. It's often hailed as the cornerstone of democracy, but really it's a peace treaty, a document born out of rebellion and royal desperation. It's less a gift of freedom and more a political band-aid. But back to your lord's castle, where such charters are born. Today, you'll witness the forging of alliances, and if you're lucky, perhaps even influence them. You see, political power is a slippery beast, and keeping it requires constant vigilance. Forget the notion that power is a static throne. It's a perpetual balancing act, more like spinning plates than sitting pretty. Consider the economic factors at play. Your lord needs you and your fellow knights to maintain his hold on power, but he's also juggling the costs of maintaining his domain. Castles don't just pop up and maintain themselves after all. A decent fortification could cost the equivalent of millions in today's dollars. And that's before you factor in the upkeep, staff salaries, food supplies, and of course the occasional bribe to keep things running smoothly. You're here to ensure your interests align with your lord's, which isn't as straightforward as it sounds. Your fief, after all, is a piece of his larger puzzle, and in this world every decision is a potential domino. A well-placed word can tip the scales in your favor, but a misstep can land you on the wrong side of a land dispute. And let's not forget that disputes can get messy, real messy. We're talking open warfare, not just a sternly worded letter. The key to survival isn't just about swinging a sword, it's about mastering the art of persuasion. You're part diplomat, part strategist, and always on your toes. The stakes are high, but the rewards are worth the risk. Power, influence, maybe even a bit of land expansion if you play your cards right. As you sit through negotiations, you'll notice the room is a who's who of medieval movers and shakers. Lords and ladies, each with their own agendas, all vying for the ear of the powerful. In this world, information is currency. Knowing who's allied with whom, who's planning what, these are the tidbits that could give you the edge. And just when you think you've got a handle on the situation, someone throws a curveball. Maybe it's a rival lord making a play for more land, or maybe it's a distant cousin with a dubious claim to your territory. The court is a living organism, constantly changing, always evolving. It's a reminder that power isn't just about brute strength, it's about adaptability. But let's not kid ourselves, this isn't a democratic utopia. It's a hierarchy, plain and simple, with your lord firmly at the top. Yet, even he isn't immune to the tides of change. A bad harvest, a failed treaty, or a rebellious baron could send everything tumbling down. It's a delicate dance, and everyone's trying not to step on each other's toes. As the day winds down, you're left with a sense of the sheer complexity of it all. The court is a microcosm of the medieval world, full of ambition, intrigue, and uncertainty. It's a reminder that in this world, power is as much about perception as it is about possession. The romantic vision of chivalry might dominate the stories, but the reality is far more nuanced. And as you ride back to your estate, the sun setting over the horizon, you can't help but reflect on the intricacies of the medieval political landscape. It's a world where knights aren't just warriors, they're players in a grand game of strategy and survival. Tomorrow, the game continues, and you'll be ready to play your part once more. As the twilight deepens, you find yourself riding home, the cool air washing over you with the kind of relief only a day of medieval politicking could invoke. It's a moment of reflection, where the weight of your chainmail feels both a burden and a badge of honour, a testament to your place in the grand, chaotic tapestry of Norman England. The path back to your manor isn't just a physical journey, it's a metaphorical one, leading you through the complexities of your role as a knight, a landholder, and yes, a cog in the feudal machine. Now, let's strip away the glamour for a second. Being a knight in the 11th century isn't all about jousting tournaments and damsels in distress. Those romantic images are about as accurate as a medieval map, charming but not particularly reliable. In truth, your life is a balancing act of duty, economics, and a hefty dose of survival instinct. You're more likely to be found reviewing tax records than rescuing maidens, and your armour? It's less about shining brilliance, and more about not getting skewered in battle. Let's talk numbers, because they never lie, even when legends do. A decent suit of chainmail, essential for any knight worth his salt, could cost the equivalent of a small estate's annual yield. We're talking about 100-200 shillings, depending on quality and workmanship. To put it in perspective, that's around the cost of a modest house today. Your warhorse? Another hefty investment, possibly more than the armour itself. Maintaining your estate, your retinue, and your equipment is a financial juggling act that would make any modern accountant sweat. Then there's the myth of the noble, chivalrous knight, an image burnished over centuries by storytellers looking for heroes. But the real picture is a bit more nuanced. Chivalry, as a code, was more of a guideline than a rulebook. Sure, it preached virtues like loyalty and bravery, but it was also a tool for social control, ensuring knights didn't start acting like medieval mercenaries at the drop of a helmet. After all, a knight's loyalty could be as fickle as England's weather, and keeping everyone on the same page was crucial for maintaining order. And while we're myth-busting, let's address those castles, those towering fortresses of stone that every knight supposedly called home. The truth is, most knights didn't live in castles. Your home is more likely a manor house, a cosy affair by medieval standards, surrounded by fields and forests that are as much your responsibility as your sword. Castles were the domain of the high lords, the barons, and the earls, the power players in this feudal chess game. Your manor is functional, not fanciful, a place of work as much as a place of rest. As you approach the manor, the evening's tranquility is a stark contrast to the day's bustle. This is where you take stock, literally. You oversee your serfs, ensure the crops are on track, and prepare for the inevitable challenges that the medieval world throws your way. The Doomsday Book of 286, commissioned by William the Conqueror, is a testament to this administrative side of knightly life. Not just a list of who owns what, It's a snapshot of an era trying to bring order to chaos, much like your own efforts to manage your fief. And speaking of chaos, there's the ever-looming spectre of war. In an age where borders are drawn and redrawn with alarming frequency, your martial skills are less about glory and more about grim necessity. Battlefields aren't the clean, honor-bound arenas of popular lore. They're messy, brutal, and unforgiving. Success requires discipline, strategy, and a good dose of luck. Your training, day in and day out, isn't just for show. It's the difference between life and the afterlife. But here's the real kicker. Being a knight isn't just about the now, it's about legacy. The land you manage, the decisions you make, they ripple through generations, shaping the future in ways you may never see. This isn't just about personal power, it's about ensuring the prosperity and stability of your descendants. It's a heavy responsibility, one that colours every decision, every alliance, every battle. As you settle in for the night, the flickering fire in your hearth casting shadows on the walls, you're left with a sense of your place in the grand scheme. You're part of a system that's as intricate as it is precarious, a player in a game that's been unfolding for centuries. The stories of knights might gloss over the gritty details, but it's those very details that define your life more than any song or story ever could. So as you finally lay down, the weight of the day slipping away, remember this. The life of a Norman knight is a complex dance of duty and destiny, a blend of the romantic and the real. It's not the fairy tale some might imagine, but it's a story worth telling, full of depth and drama that resonates even today. And as you drift into sleep, perhaps you find a sense of peace in knowing that while the world around you may be ever-changing, your role in it is as vital as it is timeless.